Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Statutory Planning Committee meeting of the 5th of November 2025. For those joining us in person and online today, this meeting is being live streamed and recorded and is available for viewing via our website and YouTube. Committee members may refer to technical devices throughout this meeting to assist them in considering the information before them and taking notes for their deliberations. And I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay our respects to elders past and present. This meeting today is being held in two parts. First of all, we're dealing with all business other than one item in this room here, and then we will move to a larger room to accommodate more deputations and people attending for item 3.2, the precinct structure plan for Floreat precinct. For the Floreat Forum, and that meeting is due to commence at around 11 o'clock. Is that correct, Sam? Yes. So if you're joining us for Floreat Forum, that meeting part will start from 11 a.m. onwards. And we will now go to dealing with this part of the meeting. So today, attending in person, we have all members other than Commissioner Adair, who is attending on Zoom. Welcome, Commissioner Adair, and no apologies. But members, are there any requests for leave of absence? Thank you very much. And disclosure of interest in relation to item 4.1, the City of Karratha Local Planning Scheme number 8, amendment number 64. Commissioner Heron has declared an actual impartiality interest in that he was previously an employee of the local government from 94 to 99 and worked on the Gap Ridge Industrial Estate much more recently for Urbis whilst an employee. So I understand, Commissioner Heron, you're happy to step out on that item? Correct. Thank you. On item 4.2, the City of Coburn Local Planning Scheme number 3, amendment 184, Member Harman has declared an indirect pecuniary interest in that he's employed by Statutory Property Group, which is listed as a landowner for multiple properties that the scheme amendment applies to, and I understand you're stepping out on that item. Correct. Thank you, Member Harman. And on 4.3, City of Mandurah Local Planning Scheme number 12, sorry, we've done a few down there in Mandurah. Amendment number 4, Member Knight has declared an actual impartiality interest in that Member Knight is a councillor of the City of Mandurah, so therefore I understand you're stepping out on that one. Thank you. Members, are there any other disclosures of interest? Thank you very much. And are there any disclosures of representation? Can all members please indicate that they've received and considered the agenda ahead of today's meeting. Thank you all. So we're now dealing with confirmation of previous minutes, and we do have two sets of minutes to confirm today. The first, can I just ask on both sets of minutes, are there any questions or issues to clarify? And are you happy to consider both together? So they're the minutes of Wednesday the 8th of October and Thursday the 16th of October. If I could please have a mover and seconder. Moved by Commissioner Brooks, seconded by Commissioner Heron. Any dissent? Thank you. The minutes are carried. And we will now go to deputations and presentations part 1. Over to you. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to everyone that's present in order to make a deputation to the Statutory Planning Committee meeting this morning, either in person or via Zoom. You have been advised your allocated time to do your deputation this morning, which will be managed by a timer, which will appear on the screen at an allocated time. If you are appearing by Zoom this morning, you will be promoted to a panelist, and I ask that you accept that request when I promote you this morning. If you do have a PowerPoint presentation this morning, this will be displayed on the screen throughout your deputation, and you're requested to advise if you wish to advance the slides. So moving to the first deputation on part 1 this morning, which is on item 4.3 on the agenda, the City of Mandurah Local Planning Scheme number 12, amendment number 4. We're welcoming Lauren Gore from the Pleasant Grove Estate resident, and Lauren is joining us by Zoom this morning. Lauren.
Just confirming you can hear me?
Oh, we can, thank you very much. Yes, we can, thank you. We'll bring up your presentation now and invite you to commence your deputation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, my name is Lauren Gore, and on behalf of community members, we object to the proposed amendment to modify R code density from R5 to R10 for lot 801 Pleasant Grove Circle for the following reasons. First, the development site provides critical habitat for forest redtail and Carnaby's black cockatoos, as shown on slides 1 to 3, slide 1's on the screen presently, as the area regularly provides foraging habitat across the Pleasant Grove estate. Approximately 93% of the development site constitutes foraging habitat, and there are 133 trees of sufficient size to serve as potential breeding trees. Under the EPBCA Act, clearing more than 1 hectare of foraging habitat or even a single breeding tree triggers the Commonwealth's threshold for a significant impact on these species. Could you please advance the slides to slide 4? Slides 4 and 5 also show that the site provides habitat for a range of native bird life, including ospreys, spoonbills, and kites. The site's biodiversity importance, therefore, is fundamentally incompatible with the higher density, anything higher than R5. Could you please advance the slides to slide 6? The development site lies within a designated tree preservation area as shown on slides 6 to 9. 154 significant chewit, marri, jarrah, and peppermint trees are located across 57 of the 74 proposed R10 lots, representing more than 70% of the total development area. The remaining portion contains other native vegetation, including paperbark, balga, Rottnest Island pine, and spearwood trees, which together with their understory vegetation provide essential habitat for native fauna. Retaining the R5 zoning supported by an LDP would enable the preservation of approximately 10% more trees compared to an R10 development outcome. Third, please advance to slide 10. Slide 10 shows that the development site lies adjacent to the Peel-Harvey estuary, with areas lying as low as 1 metre AHD that have previously experienced flooding. To avoid inundation, the development site will require infill to approximately 2.4 metres AHD. The proposed earthworks to achieve this pose significant risk to mature tree roots, may permanently alter the site's natural landscape and hydrology, and could impact the nearby Ramsar-listed Peel-Harvey estuary, which is vital to the region's ecological health. Fourth, please advance to slide 11. Slide 11 shows that the Pleasant Grove estate only has 3 entrances or exits, some of which already operate under traffic calming and monitoring due to congestion complaints. Any increase in residential density will further exacerbate evacuation outcomes in this bushfire-prone area, as shown on slides 12 and 13. Please advance the slides, thank you. Slide 14 shows that the developer's original marketing materials promoted lots averaging 1 acre in size. Further, over 300 residents have signed a petition objecting to the amendment, and our position is also supported by the Peel Preservation Group. For the reasons presented today, and to protect this environmentally significant area for future generations, we urge the committee and the Commission to reject the proposed amendment and require the applicant to develop within the existing R5 zoning, supported by an LDP that prioritises tree retention and biodiversity protection. Thank you.
Lauren, thank you very much for your deputation today. I really appreciate that and the effort that you've put into your slideshow. My name is Emma Cole, I'm the chair, and I'm now going to see if there are any questions of you from the committee members. Any questions? Yes, go ahead, Commissioner Heron.
Thank you, and thank you for your deputation. I just wanted to understand with the particularly the item around the fill associated with the road. My understanding is, however, that would be applicable regardless of the density. Are there measures in place that you think would be different under this zoning than it would be under the existing?
I think that's correct. I think that the fill, I mean, I'm not an expert, but my understanding was that irrespective of the size of the lots, there will need to be some fill. However, I think the fill would only need to take place under the dwelling. And if there are not as many dwellings on the site, there will not be as much fill. So as an overall outcome, an R5, which is effectively the same size as the land that abuts the development area, they're all half-acre blocks. If you achieved half-acre blocks across that site, you would have less fill as an outcome.
Thank you. And I just wanted to be clear that, you know, the primary objective from your perspective is around tree retention and tree management, because I want to be particularly clear on that, and I will be asking officers in that later, because my understanding is that one of the parts of this proposal is to enable greater tree retention. But I just want to understand that from your perspective, although I take your point around the traffic movement, the primary issue is around the tree management and tree retention. Is that a fair assessment?
It is fair. To be very clear, the community does not want the land developed at all. However, we appreciate that it is private land and that is not a realistic outcome. Instead, what we want achieved is like for like in the area. It is a very special part of Mandurah. The estate is known for having larger blocks, and so R10 is inconsistent with that. It is a tree preservation area, so any outcome which preserves trees, and that from just a common sense perspective would require larger lots to achieve that. Any outcome that preserves trees and therefore habitat for including, threatened species such as the black cockatoos is what we're trying to achieve here.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions for Lauren, members? Thank you, Lauren, for your deputation today.
Thank you.
The next deputation this morning, also on item 4.3 on the agenda, we're welcoming Casey Milovich and Aaron Lucas from the City of Mandurah via Zoom. Good morning, Casey and Aaron.
Morning.
Morning. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee, for letting us provide a deputation today. If you can please share the screen for the presentation, that would be very much grateful. Thank you. So the City of Mandurah are making a deputation today in relation to the Pleasant Grove Circle Amendment 4. Can you please move to the next slide? So, okay, so in supporting Amendment 4, Council recognised the environmental significance of this site, the unique offering and strong community connection, the extensive consultation with agencies, the developer and the local community, and the opportunity for a positive development, but only subject to essential controls. And that really is ensuring that one of the conditions is a local development plan. And some of the positive developments include underground sewer and connecting the road, which also can serve as another emergency access route to this estate. The scheme provisions are supported by the developer as well, and so obviously understanding the city's objective is tree retention as well, and the developer has supported our proposed, the council's proposal of Amendment 4 and all conditions relating to that. And that's really important for the committee to also understand that one of the conditions was the local development plan, and I will talk through that in the next slides. And we do encourage SPC and the Minister to not deviate from the recommendation due to the developer's already cooperation. Can you please move to the next slide? So the local development plan, it is a proposal to include this in the scheme, and this is to address the tree retention. This is allowing lot by lot planning to retain the trees. And the reason we did do some analysis in relation to the different development scenarios, and we believe that with a LDP at R10, it is a better outcome than R5 with no LDP, which is currently what's in the scheme. So an R5 without an LDP, the expected tree retention outcome is between 15 to 25% of the trees to be retained, so approximately 31 of private trees on private land will be retained. And also 50% retained on public land. The R5 with an LDP, we did do an analysis on that, and that would have been a greater tree retention. However, the current scheme does not provide for an LDP for the current zoning. That would have resulted in an estimated 30 to 45% of the private land with trees to be retained, with approximately 53 of those of the 136. An R10 with an LDP is a better outcome from our estimates than the current scheme provision, where the tree retention would be between 25 to 35% and approximately 42 of the private trees, the trees on private land to be retained as well. So the city and the developer have agreed to that, and as we have spoken about before, it would be we would strongly recommend that the committee not deviate from the requirement of an LDP. I will go through in the next slide, if you can please move, on why the LDP is our essential control. So it will identify the primary street and the lot boundary setbacks. It will dictate the site works where they can be undertaken. It will provide the landowners where the vehicle access can be on their private land. It will allow for the fencing, which will have some private elements, but also keeping in line with the current amenity to the southern area of this estate, which is an R5 zoning anyway, and it will identify where the outbuildings are. So we're trying to minimise the fill and trying to maximise the retention of the trees. If you can please move to the next slide. One of the other agreements and conditions that the developer and the city have negotiated, and we believe is a better outcome for the retention of the trees, is that they have agreed for a minimum lot size of 1,000 square metres. Currently at R10, the minimum lot size is 875. So there has been some negotiation on ensuring that the amenity to the south is still retained, and it's not a normal R10 minimum lot size. The agreed minimum average size is 1,300 square metres. 72 lots proposed instead of 113 at R10, which would have been normal. And again, all of these agreements are supporting the improved tree retention and the integration with a broader Pleasant Grove estate. If you can please move to the next.
Casey, it's Emma Culver, Chair here. Can I just check how many more slides you have, because you have
This is it. Last one.
Yeah. Last one. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
The foreshore management plan is also a condition that we are recommending, and what that will do to the foreshore area, which is the estuary foreshore area, it will provide greater controls to access to the foreshore and into the estuary. The developer has agreed to fencing, and this will also mitigate fire risk and environmental damage and negative impacts. There is as a result of designating the access controls and fencing, it'll improve the delineation and protection of high value vegetation, and it will formalise the access in and through the reserve to the estuary. They have also agreed to undertake the weed management and revegetation while they have the management over the foreshore area, and the City of Mandurah will then take that on afterwards. And they also have agreed to a dual use path connecting the area to the north of the site and the south. So in summary,
Stop you there. I don't think we need a summary at this stage, because you've really gone well over time. I have let you go over time because I think it was important to understand all of the design constraints that you put in place through the LDP, and that's been incredibly useful information. But I will now go to questions from members. Go ahead, Commissioner Heron.
Thank you for your deputation. Can I just confirm from your perspective that the the notion of the LDP controls without the change in zoning is not able to be applied, is question one. And question two, can you confirm, so sewerage connection will be undertaken as part of this, will obviously have an environment. In terms of connection of properties other than those proposed, is that proposed as a longer term strategy, or is it really limited to the lots being proposed as part of this amendment?
Thank you. I'll answer the second question. That is a Water Corp responsibility around sewerage connection. So what we're able to do with this current estate, because of this development, is include as part of the condition that there is underground sewer for this estate. The southern area, that will need to be part of future planning and forward works by Water Corporation, and so I can't really speak for them around the planning. We have been doing some advocacy and around underground sewer in Mandurah because of the estuary and its close proximity. In relation to the control of an LDP, you are correct. Currently, and L5, this area, only the zoning is R5. It does not require an LDP. So with an R10, we are suggesting and recommending strongly that an LDP does apply because we can include those controls.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions for the city? No? Thank you very much. We do appreciate the detail in your presentation today. It's been very useful. Thank you.
The next deputation this morning, also on item 4.3 on the agenda, we're welcoming Justin Page, Brendan Garvey and Adam Bassett staff, and they're here in person this morning.
Good morning, committee members. Thank you for the opportunity. We have some slides. So slide one, just entry into Pleasant Grove, so this amendment covers the last remaining undeveloped area of Pleasant Grove. Next slide, please. So as shown in this slide, the R10 amendment will deliver many community benefits, as mentioned in the city's presentation. Of note is the creation of the Foreshore Road and delivery of additional housing lots envisaged under the city's local planning strategy and the sub-regional framework. A couple of things the landowner would like to mention at this point is that despite the presence of many trees on site, the EPA acknowledged the environmental assessment report, which classified the current site vegetation condition as degraded and completely degraded, and the majority is infested with weeds with little understory. Also, the osprey nests that you saw in the photos this morning are no longer there, as these blew down last year. Next slide, please. So in 2010, there was a subdivision approval granted for 45 residential lots under the R5 zoning. The landowner did not proceed with the subdivision due to project viability, mainly associated with filling and connection to sewer. Next slide, please. The R10 amendment maximises the high amenity of the area and proximity to urban infrastructure and services, whilst still preserving the Pleasant Grove low-density character. As mentioned by the city, the developer will work closely to ensure that detailed design maximises retention of trees. This approach is reflected in the landowner's draft EPBC environmental referral to the Commonwealth. Next slide, please. To address the SPP 2.6 coastal planning, MP Rogers prepared a site-specific char map. The char map demonstrates that the R10 amendment would not be in conflict with the objectives of SPP 2.6. The coastal erosion hazard line that you can see in the dark blue line does not encroach into the subject sites, and the coastal flood inundation area, which is the light blue, does impact the R10 amendment area. However, the char map confirms that with the appropriate fill adaptation measure, the R10 amendment is acceptable. It should also be noted that if the R10 amendment is not supported, the same char map requirements would apply in any event to any R5 development. If the R10 amendment is approved, the landowners will then proceed to an EPBC environmental referral to the Commonwealth, and it's expected during this process that the environmental matters that have been raised today, including black cockatoos, other fauna and clearing of Chewett woodland, will be appropriately addressed. Thank you, and we're happy to take questions.
Almost spot on. Thank you very much for that, Justin. Members, are there any questions? Go ahead, Commissioner Heron.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you for your deputation, and I understand the majority of issues here. The one item that I would like to ask about is in terms of should the amendment proceed and go through, has the subdivision configuration been considered? And in particular, I suppose it's in relation to the southernmost component where you do have obviously lots backing on, which is obviously less than desirable. Has there been any design consideration as to how you would address that particular component?
So there has been a subdivision concept plan prepared which proposes 74 lots and has looked at tree retention as well. There's actually a lot more trees that we're retaining than the city have initially calculated. And that's plugged into the current EPBC referral. So a detailed design will come, and that will also address on a lot by lot basis filling requirements, and in particular with the southern lots, the interface with the foreshore. So that's the tricky part of the site, because obviously the lots back on to the foreshore. So there are areas of Pleasant Grove where lots already back on to the foreshore areas. So and there's things like open style fencing and other things like that. In particular, the asset protection zones for bushfire will need to be considered as well. So that, for example, if the lot's siding onto the foreshore, could be a location for a driveway or something like that.
Thank you. So just further to that, through the chair, if I could ask, with the development plans, I'm just, again, tree retention being the primary objective, but other design controls and overlooking, etc., would be able to be controlled through that mechanism. Is that a reasonable assumption?
Yes. So in particular, the rear interface with existing lots in Pleasant Grove, which is currently back onto the subject site. The engineers and we've all had a look at it, the project team with the city, and it's proposed that there'll be natural ground levels left in the rear areas, possibly up to 7-8 metres, where no filling is required, because the LDP will basically not allocate building in that area, so that the filling will grade down to the existing rear boundary, which won't impact the rear neighbours, and so any overlooking should therefore meet the deemed to comply provisions of the R codes.
Thank you. No, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions, members? No. Thank you very much for your deputation today.
Thank you.
Members, there are no written deputations for part one of the meeting today. So we will then go on to deal with our first item, which is a non-confidential item, 3.1, City of Joondalup Local Planning Scheme number 3 and Local Planning Strategy Report of Review. And we're joined today by Rowan Miller, Mick Pitt and Jaron Milligan. Please come forward. Thank you very much. Hello, Rowan and Mick.
Good morning. Good morning.
Would you like to make any comments in relation to this report before we go to questions?
None from me, thank you, Chair. Not from myself either.
Thank you very much. And I know there were some questions received in advance, whether you'd like to add any further to that, Member Franklin?
Yeah, well, thank you through the Chair, through the additional information. The key points were revolving around the recent Part 11B deliberations for sites on the intersection of Hepburn Avenue and West Coast Drive. And really it was to see how the review process of both the scheme and the structure plan, this planning strategy would be dealing with key sites that have been part of the Commission's deliberations and how that will be dealt with and recognised going forward as part of the review process.
Sure, yeah, so those sites were recognised through, well, not specifically much through this report review, through the assessment for the extension of time for the structure plan relevant to the land, and they were noted as key sites, and the status of those in terms of Part 11B applications and current approval for Delos Way, I believe. And they would be reviewed through that. So the purpose of that extension was to allow consideration and how that will be normalised through the strategy and scheme. So they are noted in by the city as requiring, I suppose, reconciliation and subsequently normalisation to reflect the current status once they're put into the scheme. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I suppose just in addition to that, I suppose it would be good for the strategy to provide some dialogue to these kind of key sites. I know there's one that was pending in process, so it's just that when as the committee we were deliberating on that proposal, a key point of it was the actual currency of the local planning framework. So just keeping that in play and making sure that the framework actually talks to that and is contemporary in guidance.
Absolutely, yeah. And that would be an item that would be considered both hopefully by the city, but also certainly through the DPC through its assessment of the strategy when it comes in. The report review did briefly touch on some of the significant development sites and I suppose the new pathways and how they will need to be considered in the strategy preparation. Yes, thank you. Correct.
Probably just picking up on that, I think one of the other areas that would be useful to understand through the strategy is where the city is intending to do its second order planning around some of its activity centres. I think if we look at Warwick Secondary Centre would be another matter that's sort of being discussed in terms of a precinct plan for a secondary centre. So I think through the strategy it'd be really useful to negotiate, not negotiate, I don't know where that word came from, to address with the city where their sort of second tier planning is happening and which activity centres they might be looking to address in what order. So that would be a useful one to pick up as well, I think, through this process.
Yeah, understood. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, we move to a mover and seconder for the item, please. Moved by Commissioner Herron, seconded by Member Harman. Any discussion? No? Any dissent? Thank you very much. That is carried. Now we do need to move to confidential items for discussion, but I just want to reiterate, if there's anyone who's joined us on the live stream and is here for the Laureate precinct plans, we are running this meeting in two parts, and that part of the meeting we are aiming to commence at 11 AM, depending on how quickly we move through the business now, but it won't be any earlier than 11 AM, so you please feel free to join us at that point. But for now, we do need to consider the confidential items on the agenda. So I am seeking a mover and seconder that we move to consideration behind closed doors so that we can close this meeting while we do so. Thank you. Moved by Commissioner Brooks, seconded by Commissioner Lakey. Any dissent? Thank you. That is carried. Thank you for bearing with us. So as I was saying, the meeting, we've already opened the meeting at 9:30 today. We've run through conflicts of interest and noting there are none on this item. And just referencing use of technical devices throughout the meeting is standard practice for Commission and Statutory Planning Committee members. Also to note that today we do have 10 verbal deputations and 9 written deputations. So as we move through those deputations, I will ask that you keep the time allocated, and noting that in respect to the two PSPs today, the precinct structure plans, that the town of Cambridge and GHD and Hatch and April have both been given 10 minutes for their deputations today. So I will now hand over to Sam to commence the deputations. Thank you all.
Thank you, Chair. The first deputation this morning is via Zoom, and we are welcoming Alastair Oliver. So Alastair, I will just promote you via Zoom this morning to deliver your deputation. Sorry, I should point out to everyone that's present to make a deputation this morning that if you do have a PowerPoint presentation, there is a clicker available on the chair there. If you just use that to advance your slides, we will display them on the screen. Moving to our first deputation from Alastair Oliver, I'll just promote you to a panellist, Alastair, so you can participate in the meeting this morning. Good morning, Alastair.
Good morning. Is the audio and video working okay?
Thank you. We can hear you. So over to you when you're ready. Thank you.
Very good. If I could just take a minute at the beginning, or just a few seconds at the beginning, just to introduce myself before I start my presentation. My name is Ali Oliver. I'm a member of the Community Working Group, and the group is tasked with maintaining open, honest and transparent two-way communication with the town and community throughout the development of the precinct structure plan. So that was a bit of background. Okay, if I could now make a start. Thank you. The town's precinct structure plan was designed to deliver win-win outcomes for the community, APL and the state government by preserving the suburb's character, protecting residential land values while enhancing precinct value, providing a high-quality shopping centre that endures for generations, all while delivering infill well beyond the Perth and Peel at 3.5 million targets. We've consistently held that both PSPs should align with the local planning strategy as endorsed by the WAPC and with the SPP and planning framework overseen by this committee. The next two slides, this one and the next, are already in your agenda, so I won't go into the detail now. They summarise the state planning policy compliance in urban structure and in built form. The key takeaways are that APL's PSP shows multiple non-conformances in height, suburb compatibility, transport, movement, accessibility, transitions, setbacks, and streetscape. The town's PSP, by contrast, is compliant. APL's justification for non-compliance rested on two key points. The first is financial viability. The town's plan is financially viable. APL's reduced land profit compared to a 20-storey proposal doesn't make the project unviable, and I recommend that an independent audit of their estimates is performed. Secondly, lease constraints. APL claims that long-term tenant leases prevented staged redevelopment and necessitated high-rise towers. They recently stated, as recently as September, in a section on page 401 of the agenda, that the leases expire in 2055. However, in April's 2023 annual report, it shows that Coles extended its lease only to 2033. That's a 22-year discrepancy. This changes everything. It means building apartments on top of a redeveloped shopping centre is feasible, and 20-storey towers were never necessary. The fundamental error has significantly influenced DPLH's recommendation in APL's favour. A decision cannot be made with such a critical factual inaccuracy. With this corrected lease information, the town's PSP, including full shopping centre redevelopment, can be fully delivered in stages, as was done at Karrinyup. Coles would remain operational throughout, while allowing construction of more than 1,000 new dwellings to begin as soon as planning approval is granted. The town's plan accommodates leases and delivers a balanced, high-quality, win-win outcome. In summary, we have one chance to get this right. The decision must align with policy and be based on verified facts. APL's errors are now exposed, and a thorough re-evaluation of both PSPs is essential before any decision is made. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alastair. Emma Cole Chair speaking now. I'm just going to ask members if they have any questions of you. Yes, go ahead, Commissioner Heron.
Yeah, thank you for your deputation, Ali. If I can just ask, so you were involved obviously in the working group. Were the operators or the owners and operators of the shopping centre on that group as well?
No, they weren't. This was a community working group that brought together the town administration, the elected members, and us representing the community, acting as communication pathways through to the community. And also we engaged with GHD as the contractor for the development of the PSP. But there was no representation for APL on that community working group. But personally, I would have seen that as a conflict of interest.
Thank you. Members, any further questions of Alistair? Thank you very much for your deputation today.
Thank you.
The next deputation is from Ken Perry. If you'd like to join us at the table, Ken.
First of all, I'd like to thank the Madam President for granting me the opportunity to make my submission and to be present here today. Thank you for your understanding. I will be short. This is not a coin toss. This is a big deal, this decision. It's what you're really looking at is the role of local government versus the private sector. The difference is one is driven by economics, one is driven by genuine community consultation and planning issues. As indicated, both are acceptable. Therefore, your choice today is, do you go with what the proper planning process has developed, or do you go with the preferred outcome for the developer? You have to allow a woman to change her mind. I very clearly recommended going with the council, the Cambridge PSP, but reading their submission, they've changed their mind and they would prefer a defer outcome where it gives them an opportunity to try to further bring together both alternatives. And that's very strongly my suggestion to you today, is it looks like an opportunity to advance the redevelopment. If you let the players go, I would give them probably a maximum of 6 months, but you're the experts, you know. This is Nedlands Reserve in Smythe Road is going ahead gangbusters, and that was the result of agreed PSP between a developer and the Nedlands Council. And we all have our view on Nedlands Council, so you can see that good outcomes are indeed possible. I'd like to thank you for your time and just remember that this is actually a very important decision. It is not a coin toss, it is not simple. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ken. Members, any questions of Ken Perry? There are no questions.
The next deputation this morning is from Pat Knott, apologies.
The gravity of today's session is enormous, as this could be the biggest decision in 60 years for this key community asset. I have kids at the primary school and frequent the forum regularly. I have no financial interest and I fully support redevelopment. I'm here because, like thousands of local people, I care very much for what the next 60 years might look like. The recommendation in the officer's report would be a poor choice. First, the towers with the largest one overshadowing the school are inconsistent with expectations around heights for the area. In the winter months, the northwest tower will block critical morning sunlight from classrooms, the outdoor learning centre and playgrounds. How can we explain to our children that we knowingly chose this option? Per page 146, The several northern towers will block winter sun to deep soil areas intended for recreation in April's plan. Note north is to the top left of that image when you look at it. There's no north rose shown. Perth has great winter sun, and except for a couple of midday hours, this key zone will have no direct winter sun. I feel this is a fatal flaw at this end of the precinct and cannot be cast aside as not being material. By contrast, the west end of Karrinyup Shopping Centre gets year-round afternoon sun and is vibrant. The April plan will be a very public failure in this regard and would be a missed opportunity. Second, despite enduring significant disruption during multi-year tower construction, no community benefit will result as the shopping precinct will not be improved. This is a poor outcome. If economics are important, wouldn't apartments be more valuable if the shopping precinct was upgraded? Third, the community report suggests commercial non-viability of the town's plan. This is stated to be driven by constraining long-term leases with anchor tenants. In August 24, via my own network, I had a phone call with a member of the Coles executive team and was told that Coles did not have a long-term lease, but now it appears they do. Coles and Able had very recently a choice to pursue a different arrangement, and they chose not to. Able is now claiming that leases are an absolute constraint to stage development of the shops. This self-imposed constraint is being used as a deliberate tactic to support their strategy of it can only be towers. The Able syndicate are motivated by capital growth, not good planning. This situation should not dictate the biggest decision for this site in 60 years. Commercial arrangements can be renegotiated, and Coles should show more respect to their customers by proactively facilitating a better plan. Fourth, if the April plan is developed to a full extent, the number of dwellings will be materially above the long-stated expectation. In addition, there can be no insights provided on requirements for local shopping centre, local supporting infrastructure. How can this meet a reasonable threshold for diligent planning? Fifth, the historical record referenced on page 153 is intriguing. The critical east-west connection in the town's PSP is true to this reference and is ideal. The east-west path in the April plan is further north and is a very poor choice. I walk this area regularly and it is too close to the busy intersection and would result in morning traffic jams and an unsafe pedestrian crossing used by school kids. Further, it bears no relationship to any logical point on the school side of Howtree Place. I believe the recommendation in the officer's report, if adopted, would alienate the majority of the local community. This is absolutely not an outcome that should emanate from a planning process for an existing and essential community asset. I ask the Commissioners today to approve the stronger community-led plan as it meets all the criteria. I do recognise, however, that the Commissioners...
So if you'd make your concluding statement, please.
2 sentences. I do recognise the Commissioners have been put in a difficult situation with 2 competing plans. If you can't approve the town's plan, then please reject both and force collaboration. This is the biggest decision in the forum for 60 years. I beg you, do not lead us down the wrong path. Thank you for letting me go over.
Thank you, Pat. Just if you could wait there for a moment or see if there are any questions for you. Any questions? Thank you, Commissioner Heron.
Thank you, and thank you for your deputation, Pat. Can I ask, in terms of, and again, I know that it's obviously a technical report, etc., but there's obviously a schedule of changes that have been proposed, including some height limitations on the April plan. Have you reviewed that? Has that given any level of comfort in terms of some of those concerns raised?
That northwest tower, which is the key tower, is still at 20 stories.
18.
18.
Sorry, under the controls. So sorry, I'm just wanting to...
Apologies, 2 stories different, yeah. Still big.
Okay. No, I just wanted to understand whether that had been appreciated. Could I also then, you did make comment about the shopping centre not being improved under the proposal. Can you just clarify your statement around that this plan would not result in the shopping centre being improved?
Well, during the life of this PSP, which I understand is 10 years,
yep.
It's very unlikely that the shopping centre would be approved. The logical progression is through the towers on the extremities. That would take a number of years to get done, and it's very unlikely that during that period, the period of the PSP, the shopping centre would experience any material improvement.
Okay, Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Members, any further questions? Thank you. And just Pat, and for the audience, when the officers come to review and make comment on this, they will work through the modifications that are recommended so that you can have awareness about where those changes are coming in. Thank you.
Thanks.
The next scheduled deputation from Doreen Zygmunt is an apology this morning, so we are moving to the deputation from Grace Rooks next, please.
Thank you very much. Hello, my name is Grace Rooks. I am a parent of Floreat Park Primary School, and our school families overwhelmingly oppose the April PSP. We even hand-delivered over 90 written submissions to the department themselves. The decision you make today not only impacts the forum site, it uniquely, significantly impacts on the school community that neighbours. That's 300 families, up to 600 students, as young as 4, plus teaching and support staff. Our community rejects 20-storey towers that overlook and overshadow our school grounds that the children enjoy. We demand safe, direct pedestrian and bike pathways, and we reject the illogical, risky crossings proposed by April in their plan. The April Traffic Impact Assessment that underpins their PSP is woefully flawed. It only tracks retail foot traffic, it prioritised cars, many other issues, and if you have not read it in full, you must. In contrast, the community PSP pointedly designs with school traffic firmly in mind, and it delivers the same number of dwellings without the encroachment. Did you walk or ride to school as a child? Do you think that's important? How community spaces are shaped for our youngest, least mobile, most vulnerable is fundamental to good urban design. The WAPC Operational Policy 2.4 Planning for School Sites dictates schools must be serviced by safe, convenient, well-designed bike and pedestrian networks that lead directly, conveniently, safely as possible to the school. This is your responsibility today. You have 2 PSPs in front of you, and the department has deemed both provide the same number of dwellings. Tick. Then consider, please, these key points of difference, apart from the overwhelming community support for the community one. Which PSP in front of you provides appropriate transition from the forum to the west, to the existing primary school, recognising Howtree Place as the main thoroughfare with setbacks, shade and treatment, which has a traffic management plan that adequately addresses how families commute to and from the school daily, which would allow teachers to shepherd a classroom of students back to the forum site to use the shared services of the library and the green spaces, which PSP has a library and shared spaces. Crucially, fundamentally, when this development is done in 60 years' time and the dwellings are sold for a pretty penny, the next generation of students will be at that school, and which PSP can we all say genuinely provided the better outcome for the community whilst meeting the housing need? That is the legacy of your decision today. I see I'm at time because I've spoken slower than I was expecting, but I do want to close with a quote from the Honourable John Kerry in his maiden speech to Parliament in 2017, because I think he got it right. Where there is opposition to density, it is often for legitimate reasons. What people are seeing built is disgraceful, poor design, minimal green outdoor spaces, and we demand quality outcomes. We demand greater, stronger benchmarks that developers need to meet to ensure genuinely livable, innovative and sustainable buildings that create real communities in which people want to live. So on behalf of the community that has engaged in good faith at every step, and every school family that will come in the next 60 years, I ask you to make the right decision, to reject the April PSP and to support our community PSP.
Grace, thank you for your deputation today. Members, are there any questions of Grace? No questions for you, Grace, thank you.
Thank you very much.
The next deputation is from Melanie Foley. Yeah, the largest one in the centre.
Can you hear me? I'm a Floreat local and member of the CWG, speaking today in my personal capacity. I've supported the town's plan for 18 months and believe APL's proposal is fundamentally inconsistent with sound urban design principles. The department's recommendation prioritises commercial expediency over sound planning, supporting a proposal that fails to meet the intent of SPP 7.2 precinct design. I'll focus on two unmet design elements, urban ecology and movement and access, while other deputations today address the remaining elements. APL's plan lacks measures for tree canopy, biodiversity, water-sensitive design and energy efficiency, all core expectations of this design element. It makes no provision for waste reduction, circular economy principles, energy generation or water conservation. In short, this proposal is absent of sustainability measures. It does not deliver a climate responsive precinct as required by policy and expected by community. APL's plan prioritises vehicle convenience over pedestrian safety and sustainable transport. The network focuses on car arrivals and parking, with fragmented pedestrian links and no proper bicycle network. Despite policy requirements, there are no mode share targets and no real measures to promote walking, cycling or public transport. APL's TIA admits congestion will worsen, but provides no mitigation or mode shift strategies. New road links only improve parking access, ensuring the precinct remains car-dominated and disconnected. The department's modification requiring APL to resolve discrepancies between its TIA and the town's is inadequate. APL's TIA is deeply flawed, relying on outdated data, no traffic growth factor, and uses dwelling numbers instead of parking bays to model trips. It overestimates public transport use, and it understates traffic impacts. Worse, APL's TIA models only partial development, excluding future redevelopment of the Floreat site. Yet, the department recommends to you that a modification of 8 stories above the shopping centre. This position greatly intensifies the site while leaving traffic impacts unresolved. I must highlight the impact of APL's car-dominated plan on the adjacent primary school. It may be the only primary school in WA whose catchment runs directly through the heart of an activity centre. Many children walking or cycling to school must pass through the centre, sharing space with vehicles. The lack of safe, separated pedestrian and cycling routes is a serious safety issue that has been entirely overlooked. In contrast, the town's plan prioritises safe, direct pedestrian and cycling routes. It reduces vehicle dominance and plans for mode shift. Endorsing a plan that fails to meet state design policy sends the wrong message that compliance is optional. It undermines community trust and the planning system's credibility. I urge you to refuse APL's plan and approve the town's, or alternatively, defer your decision today until you have adequate information in front of you. The decision you make today will shape this community for generations. Thank you.
Melanie, thank you very much for your deputation today. Members, do you have any questions for Melanie? No questions, thank you.
Thank you.
The next deputation this morning is from Christy Gannon and Anna Leshinkaya.
Thank you so much. Thank you. My name is Christy Gannon. I'm President of the CWRA. The town-led PSP meets community expectations by aligning with the local planning strategy shaped through years of consultation with residents, DPLH and the WAPC. The LPS golden thread runs from its origins prior to 2015 through to its 2021 WAPC endorsement to the PSP before you today. The LPS is not just a statutory document, it's the covenant residents trust when making life-defining decisions. The community envisioned a vibrant hub meeting density targets,
Yet this recommendation backs a single landholders plan that conflicts with the LPS and offers little public benefit. The Forum hasn't had a major upgrade in over 40 years, and APL has invested little since acquiring it in 2009. Sorry, this isn't working. I will focus on two elements from SPP 7.2, which APL fails to satisfy. With element 3, APL's plan lacks diverse public spaces, focusing on retail within an ageing shopping centre. Old car parks and tall buildings overshadow and overlook public spaces, houses, and the school. Pedestrian safety suffers as foot traffic is routed through vehicle prioritised intersections with loading zones along Howtree Place, discouraging street activation. In contrast, the town's PSP strengthens green corridors, upgrades Floria Avenue and Howtree Place, linked via an outdoor mall. It includes accessible pathways and better crossing, prioritising pedestrians. In short, APL prioritises cars and height, the town builds community. The APL proposal is retail-centred and lacks the diversity required of a genuine activity centre as per element 5. There is no provision for civic use, relying on uncertain relocation of the town-owned Boulevard Centre. Planning is tied to current tenancies, leaving little scope for diverse uses as population needs evolve. Dwellings are pushed near main roads, and there is no commitment of diverse housing, prioritising high-rise yield with quick profit over social needs. Conversely, the town's PSP adds non-retail floor space above the shopping centre and promotes a mix of housing types. Community and mixed-use spaces are integrated, such as childcare, health services, and aged care. In conclusion, the recommended endorses a plan inconsistent with SPP 7.2 and the town's local planning strategy. We therefore request the committee to reject or defer the recommendation to conduct analysis on the town's plan, which is clearly missing. The town-led PSP achieves infill targets and represents proper and orderly planning. This is a plan for all, not for one.
Kirsty, Nana, thank you for joining us today and thank you for the deputation. Members, do you have any questions? No questions, thank you very much.
The next deputation this morning is from Mark Walters.
Morning, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm the principal of Floriat Park Primary School, here to outline some key concerns about the proposed plan of the Floriat Activity Centre. While we welcome well-considered developments and the benefits they bring, child safety, school functionality and community needs must be central to planning decisions. Floriat Park Primary is positioned in a unique spot, directly adjacent to and within the walkable catchment of this activity centre. This proximity has been acknowledged in the past, for example, when avoiding the placement of mobile phone towers on the forum. The recommendation in front of you introduces an unexpectedly high number of dwellings within our catchment, creating uncertainty about our ability to cater for new enrolments. The campus has no room for expansion. We have 2 demountable classrooms already on our playground, whilst another 2 occupy our school oval, both spaces undersized for the current 577 students. We undesirably rely on Maclean Oval for break times, which is a public space, and incidents have occurred there. Any growth of this scale should be accompanied by plans for additional educational infrastructure, yet none has been considered. There's no evidence to suggest that student safety has been adequately considered. With limited public transport in Floriat, the plan is vehicle-centric. Existing peak hour traffic around the school is already difficult, despite a single crossing warden and occasional ranger support. More vehicle movements without mitigation measures will heighten the risk to crossings heavily used by our children. This year alone, 2 students have been struck by vehicles on Howtree Place, despite a strong road safety programme. Heavy vehicles, buses, speeding motorists regularly share this space, as evidenced by the constant mobile speed camera presence in this area. It's already a dangerous environment, and additional traffic will make it worse. The height of the proposed towers directly across from school raises serious concerns about privacy, safety, and overshadowing. Buildings of up to 18 stories would overlook our playgrounds and reduce natural light in learning areas, increasing the reliance on artificial light and heating. The community expects responsible design that protects students' privacy and well-being while avoiding overshadowing. We support thoughtful redevelopment of the opportunities it can bring for shared community facilities, safer pedestrian movement and improved public spaces. However, there is limited provision to replace existing amenities such as the library and meeting rooms at the Boulevard Centre that our families and school depend upon. We urge meaningful engagement with the school and local community to ensure the precinct continues to support learning, safety and connection. Our school and community are not opposed to redevelopment. We simply ask that planning decisions prioritise student well-being, address school capacity and prevent overshadowing, strengthening community facilities. Floriat Park Primary School and the Forum are the heart of this community, places of learning, places of gathering and places of belonging. The proposed plans prioritise population density over community cohesion, and we therefore assert that the Commission requires more information in order to make a collaborative, future-focused decision on this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Appreciate the comments that you've made today, and I think some of the issues you've raised around traffic management, etc., and impacts on the school will flesh out throughout the meeting. One thing I did want to ask you is that under the local planning strategy, there is a dwelling target for this district centre of 900 to 1,250 new dwellings. So I just wanted to ask if you're aware that that is already accounted for in the local planning framework.
Yes.
Thank you. Members, are there other questions? Thank you, Commissioner Herron.
Thank you for your submission. And again, many of the points are noted. I did want to check in terms of the issue around privacy. In terms of my understanding is the Education Department encourages passive surveillance for the safety and that of the school. Is there, what is the concern in terms of the privacy side of things? Because both options will obviously have, I suppose, an element of height associated with it and some element of overlooking. Is that an area of concern?
So the proposal with the 18-storey towers would significantly overlook our playground, outdoor learning classroom and the spaces where children congregate. Whereas the town's proposal with lower height buildings would be less invasive.
Thank you.
Any further questions, members?
Just
Yes, go ahead, Commissioner Lakey.
thank you, Mark. Mark, you mentioned the density, but also overshadowing quite a lot. Were you concerned about the overshadowing specifically?
We're aware that the proposed 18-storey towers would cast a shadow over a key space in our school, our outdoor learning area, which is an open outdoor classroom area, which was supported by the P&C and the school and built a couple of years ago. And it would cast a shadow across that area and the library.
So just to clarify, the outdoor learning area and the library. Great, thank you. Any further questions, Member Franklin?
Thank you for your presentation. In previous presentations, there's been discussion of the catchment of the school and walking to school, and I just wanted to get a greater appreciation on how that access is provided at this time, and that kind of modal split of that.
Yes, I don't have an exact figure, but a significant number of our students arrive at school by crossing Howtree Place and crossing the boulevard and then Howtree Place, or coming through the Floriat Forum and crossing where the warden currently is.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Chair, can I just have another?
Yes, sure, go ahead.
Thank you, Mark. Just following on from that, and you mentioned that it's dangerous. There's been a couple of accidents. So compared to the two plans and currently what you have there existing, how will it be more dangerous for, say, the April plan or the town's plan?
Simply the increased traffic that would be a result of the dwellings being proposed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you very much for your deputation.
Thank you, everybody.
The next deputation is from Mayor Gary Mack, Luke Gibson, Etienne Brits and Aaron Augustin.
Thank you, Chair and members, for the opportunity to present on behalf of the town of Cambridge. Today, our contentions and our associated request is straightforward. The SBC, despite being advised by the DPLH staff that both draft plans are capable of approval, are really only be given the opportunity to generally consider one, that is being the APL-led plan. As such, it is requested that the committee resolve to defer both draft plans so as to allow each plan to be considered on its merits, with the SBC being provided with a genuine opportunity to make alternate decision, one that the DPLH staff openly state would be a suitable planning decision. That is, put simply, what we request is that the SBC be presented with material that you don't have now, which is our plan being reviewed by the TPLH with modifications. This is not just about land use planning, it's about procedural fairness. The town's position rests on 4 key grounds. Firstly, the building height proposed in the Apple PSB are inconsistent with the State Planning Policy 4.2 and the town's endorsed local planning strategy. Secondly, commercial lease terms have dictated the planning framework to an unacceptable degree, producing poor outcomes for building height, interface and amenity. Thirdly, community feedback has not been adequately reflected in the DPLH assessment. And fourthly, the SBC report's refusal reasons misapply planning principles. The report also contains a factual error regarding the town's design review process. And the assessment seems to consider plans by way of comparison without any general assessment of each plan's merits. I will now shortly expand on these grounds. But first, I'd like to go to context and strategic fit. The town's 2021 local planning strategy, endorsed by the WA Planning Commission, establishes Floreat as a district centre, targeted for mid-rise development, 6 to 8 stories in the core, tapering to 2 to 5 stories in the frame, to deliver around 1,000 dwellings and over 34,000 square metres of commercial space. This modelling, based on TBB planning and extensive community consultation, shows that the growth targets can realistically be achieved through the town-led PSP. The town-led PSP achieves these targets without breaching infrastructure or landscape capacity and integrates well with the adjoining open space and established neighbourhood character. The Apple PSP, by contrast, proposes several towers of up to 18 to 20 stories, higher than the mid-rise envelope anticipated by the State Planning Policy 4.2. Now, going back to my key points, building heights are unacceptable. Now, the SPP 4.2 defines district centres as mid-rise, walkable and community-focused. The Apple proposal conflicts with these parameters by introducing high-rise topologies inconsistent with the future intended character and compatible with the existing landscapes and surrounding low-density R12.5 housing. The town-led PSP conversely provides a gradated transition, 2 to 5 stories along Floreat Avenue, 6 to 8 stories in the core, and thus meeting SPP 7.2 Design Element 3 on built form, scale and character. The excessive height of the Apple PSB will, as we've heard already, overshadow adjacent residential streets as key morning and afternoon times, reduce solar access to public places, and create an abrupt scale discontinuity inconsistent with precinct hierarchy and the future character test of SPP 7.2 Outcome 1. Leases and planning considerations is the second point. Now, giving complete overriding consideration to the leases means that the plan will likely fail to deliver on the comprehensive redevelopment of the shopping centre, a matter that the community has clearly indicated that it desires. It is also important to use a shopping centre lease expiry date. It's also improper to use a shopping centre lease expiry date as justification for a planning horizon. The intent of future land use planning is for long-term visions taking precedence over short practical considerations and ownership cycles. The town-led PSP provides a vision for 2050 and was deliberately lease neutral, ensuring adaptability whether or not the existing structure is retained. The town-led PSP is deliberately lease neutral, ensuring flexibility whether or not the existing shopping centre is retained. The SPC's report suggested that full-scale development is, and I quote, unlikely due to lease complexity, unquote, is largely unfounded and undermines the fundamental purpose of the PSP, being to appropriately plan for the future, having regard reasoned town planning principles. Overweight leases has driven the poor design outcomes, particularly in building height and bulk. Key point 3 is community evidence. The community's voice has been clear and consistent. Of more than 1,700 submissions, over 85% opposed Apple's PSP, citing height, traffic and character concerns. Conversely, feedback on the town-led PSP was supportive of mid-rise density and a balanced form of renewal. That was by 80% of submissions. A community working group consisting of community and elected members was established to work through the town-led PSP, and open forums were held between 2023 and 24, demonstrating genuine engagement consistent with SPP 7.2 Outcome 9. Procedural fairness requires this evidence to inform the decision instead of being underweight in the SPC report. Point 4, proper planning. Critique of the SPC refusal. The Department's recommendation to refuse the town-led PSP is based on claims of, and I quote, impractical staging and absence of DRP testing, unquote. The planned staging was explicitly designed to enable incremental redevelopment of each block while maintaining retail continuity, a practical approach consistent with SPP 7.2 Outcome 4. The town's report to council addressed feasibility and implementation, sequencing in detail those findings. Those findings appear to have been discounted without countervailing evidence. Contrary to the SPC report, the town-led PSP was reviewed by the town's design review panel in August 2024. The design review panel supported the plan's legibility, public realm quality and mid-rise hierarchy, recommending only refinements to Florida Avenue interface treatment. It is essential that the SPC record regarding the DRP be corrected for any determination. That is, our DRP reviewed our plan. Now, Apple versus the town PSP, this is what we contend is the facts. The town's plan delivers the same yield within mid-rise form consistent with infrastructure limits and community expectations. Apple plan achieves no demonstrable strategic gain to justify its scale. It simply concentrates density vertically, undermining SPP 4.2, activity centre hierarchy, and the town's local planning strategy. DPLH staff clearly state that each plan is capable of approval, yet the SPC is only really provided with the tools to approve one of the two acceptable plans. The DPLH has not provided the SPC with the suite of modifications that would be required if the SPC was minded to approve the town-led plan, the plan that is considered more contextually appropriate and strategically compliant. This omission is clearly prejudicial against the town's proposal and denies the town, as proponent, its entitlement to procedural fairness. Procedural fairness, also known as natural justice, is critically important in government decision-making because it ensures that decisions are made transparently, consistently and justly, especially when those decisions affect individuals' rights, interests or legitimate expectations. When government processes are fair and transparent, enhances community confidence in public institutions, reduces perceptions of bias, favouritisms, corruption, encourages greater civic engagement and cooperation. Fair procedures often lead to better decisions because decision makers receive more complete and accurate information. They consider diverse perspectives, including those of affected parties, and reduces the risk of legal challenges or administrative appeals. Procedural fairness is a cornerstone of accountable and ethical governance. That being the case, the town strongly recommends that not the SPC approves the town's PSP and refuses Apple PSP, but rather that both proposals be deferred so as to allow the DPLH to prepare a more complete report that affords the SPC the ability to make any of the decisions statutorily available to it. Chairs, members, deferral and proper consideration of the town's ZPSB is not delay, it is diligence. It will ensure the SPC's decision is policy consistent and public credible. This approach will protect both good planning practice and public confidence in the West Australian planning system. Thank you, and I'm happy to field any questions. I might just get a bottle of water if that's all right.
Sure, go ahead, Gary, thank you. Well, thank you for your deputation today. I'll now open for questions from members. Commissioner Herron.
Thank you very much for your deputation, and as you probably appreciate more than anyone, this obviously has history. I do, however, your queries and items that you raised around procedural fairness, you would accept, however, that the process that would normally occur when planning over a site would engage with the landowner. And could you perhaps explain what processes and attempts were made in terms of collaborating with the landowner in terms of developing an alternative?
I'll defer to the Director.
Through the Chair, early in the process, the town had limited interaction with the landowner, with that being based on a historical policy position regarding development contact. That said, the town's consultant, GHD, represented by Aaron here today, did reach out to APEL, offering a discussion on the town's PSP. In addition to that, APEL did lodge a submission on the town's draft PSP, and more recently, town staff did attend a number of meetings with the DPOH and APEL. That notwithstanding, it is noted that the town's local planning scheme, planning strategy, as adopted by the Commission, was subject to comprehensive consultation at the time, and that did include with the relevant property.
Thank you. If I may, through the Chair, and I suppose because linked to that though is that there was obviously a proposal that had been put forward, which, as I understand, was rejected and was not allowed to go to consultation. Is there a sense that, and again, what we're trying to do is looking at how do we best represent the varied interests. Is there elements of the plan that you have presented that you would see would be worth review in terms of aligning with some of the issues that may have been raised by the landowner?
Through the Chair, certainly I don't think any plan is perfect. Certainly the town feels that this plan is the stronger of the two, is more aligned with the established and adopted framework. That is not to say there might not be some benefit in further collaboration and consideration of more detailed matters. The town's view those detailed matters could be considered as part of a later application for development approval, but equally it could be considered as part of the precinct structure planning process. But in any event, I suppose the fundamental position of the town is that the town's PSP is far more closely aligned to the established framework than that of APEL's.
Through the Chair, finally, if I may, would you, a plan is great, but it's obviously implementation is the key factor here. In terms of without having a level of support and engagement from the landowner, what is your expectation in terms of how the plan and its vision may be implemented?
Through the Chair, that would involve by necessity some discussion at some point with the landowner. We have a landowner that owns 95% of the core, with the town owning a small portion, and the town is obviously present as a regulator. Irrespective of what plan is adopted by the SPC now or later, there is going to need to be some interaction between the town and the landowner, whether that's done through a continued examination of the draft PSP or whether it's done through a DA process, probably doesn't matter. But I think we would concede that there does need to be some discussion at some point regarding the implementation of the plan, because as you say, the plan is a step in the process, it's not the end point. The end point is for the plan to actually facilitate development on the ground. So like I say, irrespective of the plan that is adopted now or later, there are subsequent steps in the planning process to actually ensure development physically occurs, and that would be best supported by some negotiation liaison between the town and the landowner.
Thank you.
Thank you. I might just ask, in relation to the reference to the design review undertaken on the Town of Cambridge PSP, was that provided to DPLH in terms of the findings of, or recommendations of the local DSP design review? My apologies. Was that provided to DPLH as part of the assessment process?
Thank you for the question. So it's just the outcomes of the design review process are described in part 2 of the town's PSP. The actual minutes and the content, more detailed description of the meeting outcomes, if they're not provided with the town's report, then they are most likely not in the papers.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question I had is in relation to the PSP. You've talked a lot today about procedural fairness. You've talked about the things that you don't like about the APL PSP, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to talk to the merits of your plan, which is part of the consideration of the members today. One question I had is you're seeking your views on how the commercial outcome experience across the discrete buildings would work, given that that is quite significantly different to having a shopping centre experience. So if you could please talk through that, that would be helpful.
Just to clarify, Chair, do you mean in terms of having two separate structures to the building?
Just in terms of the fact that there are different, that you're not having a consolidated shopping centre, that you do have a number of discrete buildings in place of a shopping centre. So I'm just interested in your views of how that would work from a commercial perspective.
I think fundamentally, and I know your question goes to the town's plan, but I'm not sure the two plans are materially misaligned in that sense. Both plans anticipate some degree of stage redevelopment of the centre core. Obviously, the town's plan anticipates complete redevelopment, whereas the APL plan reflects one building to Florida Avenue, one very large building, but one building to Florida Avenue with upgrades to the remainder of the centre core retail floor plate. So I think unless the question is to the separation of the retail spaces being suboptimal from a owner's point of view, I'm not sure there's significant difference.
Okay, it was really about, you know, the floor space, what sort of commercial offerings you could provide. Could you make provision for a full line, half line supermarket, those sorts of things, given that we're looking at a shopping centre type arrangement under APL's proposal, and under your proposal, separation between buildings?
Yes, so separated buildings, but two full line supermarkets. In fact, in the town's plan, quite generously so. One of the things that is not discussed in the SPC report, but there has been a year or so of process and dialogue between DPLH, APL and the town, is exploration of how staging to the northern end of the centre may work, avoiding the existing Coles lease area. I'm not sure if that's been provided to the committee, but certainly the town's expected outcome is, and one of the driving considerations of the town's early drafting of this PSP was to maintain retail continuity for at least two full-line supermarkets, to provide the full extent of retail floor space supported by the economic analysis that supports the PSP, and to look at opportunities, given that the town has made no resolution about the use of its library site, how a library might be integrated with a range of other community-facing uses, whether that be aged care, healthcare type uses, short-term accommodation type uses as well.
Thank you very much, that's very helpful. Also just interested in the type of dwelling yield that you're looking at. It's noted that there is a high proportion of smaller apartments on offer, and one of the considerations that has been raised through the report is how that would bridge the market between what are large standalone houses in Floreat and what would likely be a downsizing market, as we've found in other activity centres where we do see apartments offered.
Yes, there seems to be an attitude prevailing, not at the committee, but elsewhere around the fact that dwelling sizes here are expected to be significant and very large, comparable to recent development applications for Ocean Village and other nearby sites. The town's view is that this location, whilst it is in a very high value part of Perth, will not necessarily have, particularly without the extent of building height that's anticipated in the town's plan, as significant demand for such large apartments, more of a town centre environment akin to, say, a Claremont type location. The town's modelling does use a range of apartment sizes, including a bevy of 3 and 4 bedroom apartments, not to the same extent of modelling the rationale used in ACL's forecast, but certainly something we'd expect in a similar town centre environment.
Thank you. Members, questions? Yes, go ahead, Member Harmer.
How would that play out? The reason I ask, mainly in regards to the Coles, the east-west connection, the way that the plan is set out now, sort of comes right through the middle of Coles. How do you envisage that staging to allow for, continuity of both supermarkets?
Continuity of access to supermarket space within the district. So I'd submit to the committee that there's no real reference in the town's plan that staging should be sequential in the manner that it appears in the table. There is also references to the fact that stages, which might be really quite large, over 200 apartments plus a retail floor space, could be further fragmented if that's the preferred delivery model for the landowner. It's obviously quite difficult for a town to anticipate what the market may deliver in terms of retail and residential components at once. I mentioned before an option for a northern supermarket option that avoided the Coles lease area. That modelling suggests less than full line supermarket outcome because of the space constraint. But I guess there would be an option, and there is space available for a plan that has an east-west connection directly through the site that enables two supermarket spaces to exist concurrently. Of course, there are plenty of examples around metropolitan Perth and very recent examples considered by bodies similar to this, where leases come to an end and full redevelopment of a space is contemplated. Glengarry, Moss Lane, Fremantle Wool Stores, there's quite a number.
Questions, members? Member Franklin?
There's a recent mooting of deferral of this item for further. I just wanted to clarify what the actual purpose of that deferral is. Is it actually for us to be further informed and a review to be conducted, or is it actually to look at a modified plan that combines both elements? I was just a little bit confused about what really sort of being proposed by the
Certainly. Through the Chair, the suggestion of a deferral would enable the Department to provide to the SPC a suite of modifications that would be desired to the Towns Plan if the SPC was minded to approve the Towns Plan. Obviously, the recommendation before the SPC today is to approve the APL Plan with some modifications, but as the Officer report clearly identifies, both plans are eminently approvable. So the Town's preference would be that the SPC is given a genuine opportunity to look at the Town's Plan, and if the SPC was inclined to support the Town's Plan on the basis of, amongst other things, its significant alignment with the Commission adopted local planning strategy, it would be given a series of modifications to consider, noting of course that it's probably unlikely that the SPC would ever approve a draft PSP with no modifications. We accept if the SPC was going to approve the town-led PSP, there would need, in all likelihood, be at least some modifications. All we ask is for that list of modifications to be provided to the committee for its consideration.
Thank you, members. Anything further? Thank you, Commissioner Lakey.
Yeah, thank you. I'd just like to come back to engagement with the proponent, APL. And you mentioned that if your PSP was approved, that you would engage. And you mentioned earlier that there's a policy that prevents that. And I sort of reflect on the fact that APL lodged theirs or started working on their PSP, I think in 2019, with no engagement. And then the town commenced its own one 4 years later. And here we are with 2 PSPs to consider. But now you say that if we approve yours, then the engagement will commence. And I'm just trying to work out, isn't that bit topsy-turvy, that the engagement should occur beforehand so that you know you've got a plan that is implementable and can be delivered with the proponent who owns 95% of the land.
Through the chair, I suppose the comment was that the intended to be that the process would benefit from the engagement. The policy I refer to is what it is. Any future development or any future planning for the site would benefit from engagement with the landowner. That's acknowledged. The consultation and the interaction that has taken place to this point is as I described it earlier. That's just a historical observation. Going forward, however, the town would need to consider how it interacts and how it liaises with the landowner, and that's irrespective of whatever plan the SPC chooses to adopt.
I'd also like to add that the town's leadership has changed in recent years, particularly in the last 2 years, particularly in terms of the mayor and the composition of the council. So I think that is also a factor which would can lead to the outcomes that I think you were questioning us on.
Follow up on that, Mac. So in hindsight, it would have been better to have engaged with the proponent originally to work out with one plan.
Look, I was not privy at the time. There was meetings between the previous mayor and Apple. I wasn't at those meetings. I was a councillor at that stage and wasn't invited. Earlier on, we did have meetings in my realm as mayor. Earlier on, within the 2 years, we had one meeting in Apple's offices. Yes, so we did do that.
Thank you. Look, Mayor Mac, I will just pick up on that because it is discussed in the report, and I think that the applicant team for APL have indicated that they'll raise this during their deputation, which has been provided in advance to us, as all have that come in writing. You talked to procedural fairness, but I just wanted to ask you about the town of Cambridge in 2024 did refuse to assess and advertise the APL PSP, and in fact that had to then come to the Statutory Planning Committee, and the Statutory Planning Committee had to determine that it be advertised, and the DPLH ran the advertising. That is unusual. It didn't meet the deemed provisions. I just wanted to give you the opportunity, given that procedural fairness has been raised, for you to respond to that.
If I might take that, Chair, through you, that is a reasonably accurate summation of the events. I suppose it is largely a moot point now. As you say, the matter came to the SPC. The SPC resolved to direct the department to advertise it. The department advertised it in accordance with the regulations. Both PSPs were ultimately advertised in accordance with the regulations. Both PSPs were considered by council following consultation, both as it happened on the same night in November last year, and both proposals sit before the SPC today. So I suppose the decision on hand for the SPC is based on a compliant process to this point, particularly in relation to consultation. So council's previous decision, I think in mid last year, is probably largely a moot point at this stage.
Thank you very much, Planning Director. I think you'd understand, though, that as the report states, it's a highly unusual situation for the SPC to be dealing with two draft PSPs, and the advice from the department is that whilst its deemed provisions don't expressly limit us in approving two, that would you agree that it would be inconsistent with orderly and proper planning to have two PSPs for approval, and you accept that the SPC must approve one PSP?
Through you, Madam Chair, absolutely. It would be, I don't know how it would play out practically with two PSPs adopted for one property that are not exactly the same. There would be a tension there that would be difficult to resolve.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Herron?
If I may, one point that I'm still unclear on, has that policy in terms of being able to engage with proponents, does that still stand, or is that historic position?
Through the Chair, there is still a policy that exists. Council has made decisions of late that has allowed staff to liaise with the department and APL on this matter. So that is the series of meetings that the town attended. I referred to in my previous comment. So there is an ability there for town to liaise. Yes.
Thank you.
And there's no restrictions on elected members meeting. Obviously, apart from note taking, there's no restrictions.
follow up on that
Commissioner
one.
Lakey.
So, sorry to labour the point on this, but if the town's PSP is approved here, you're saying that council will engage with proponent. If the proponent's PSP is approved, will you also engage with the proponent?
Through the chair, irrespective of which PSP is adopted, and going back to the chair's previous point, it's likely to be one plan, not two. We would seek clarification as to the ability of staff to liaise with the applicant, but I'd say that would be irrespective of which plan is adopted. That would apply regardless.
Commissioner Brooks.
I just wanted to ask, so there's the technical reports that are provided to support each of the PSPs are different. There are a couple of additional reports provided in your plan. I guess I just wanted to understand from your perspective, was there anything that was provided within those additional technical reports that couldn't be satisfied or addressed equally well by either plan? Was there a key outcome that of those technical reports that was being delivered by the town's plan that could not be delivered by the other one?
Sorry, just so I'm understanding. You're referring to the fact that both plans have different outcomes, particularly across, say, movement, and that.
Yep. So sorry if I wasn't clear. So the movement plan, so both plans include items to address movement and transport and traffic and all of those things, but the town's plan specifically includes an environmental management, an environmental plan, environmental assessment report, and also includes a water management strategy, which are not there in the April plan currently. I just wanted to understand if there was anything in either of those two technical documents that was of critical importance that could not be delivered under the April plan without further technical reports being prepared, I suppose.
In terms of the two reports you mentioned that are, say, absent from April's submission package, there are certainly matters that aren't as forcefully addressed in part one of April's PSP than the town's plan. They're more indirectly addressed, if at all, and I think the attachment to the GHD submission on this item talks to some of those around water management and tree protection. In terms of maybe the other significant item is around movement. I'm not sure there could be some kind of reconciliation between the two plans without touching the technical reports for a topic like movement, simply because April's plan relies on a vehicle access through the site that would significantly change the dynamics of traffic movement in the district. So I suspect that if the committee was to, I think picking up the emphasis of your question, was to try and reconcile those two together, it would take a modification and a relook at the assumptions that underpin April's TAA.
Thank you, members. Are there any further questions? There are no further questions. Thank you very much for your deputation today.
The next deputation is from Dion White, Wes Barrett, Chris Dwyer, Peter Hughes and Euston Gabrielle.
Very good. Thank you for allowing us to present today. My name is Chris Dwyer. I represent MJA Studio. We were engaged by April in 2019 to commence investigations on the Floreat Forum site, understanding how we can reinterpret the retail premises on site to facilitate urban infill. As part of that, we undertook a number of site feasibility studies, understanding bulk scale and the arrangement of the dwelling density on site. Very quickly, I'll take you through the DRP process. We attended 3 with the Town of Cambridge DRP panel, and part of that was really understanding the metrics of the site. What are the fixed elements? What elements are likely to be there for a long period of time, and how can we work with the existing site to realise those aspirations within the LPS identified by the town. As part of that, there was a strong desire for an east-west link to link through Chandler Avenue, which was found within some historical documents through the precinct. There is this element of the Coles supermarket in place with the level 1 gym, health and wellness, and that presented as a real roadblock to that east-west connection. So we took an alternate approach with a slightly augmented arrangement that facilitated a significant green space in the centre of that. Through the DRP process, originally we had a roundabout on Howtree Place that was deemed unsafe for pedestrians, so that went from to a slip lane, and then the lane itself, or the road itself, was two-way originally, but the flow of traffic meant that it was undesirable from a safety perspective, so it turned into a single lane direction from a west to an east between Howtree and Floriat Avenue. As part of the process, we then investigated subterranean levels. How can we maximise deep soil plantings across the precinct, hitting over 10% in accordance with the volume 2 of the R codes. We then identified opportunities for significant tree retention within the frame precinct, which is to the rear of the existing residential lots and presents as a really great opportunity for the leafy nature of Floriat to be retained. We then moved through into on-structure planting, intentionally keeping podiums lean and thin and low to provide the least impact to the neighbours, the surrounding neighbours and the streetscape, and really affording additional green space on that roof elevation. Before we then looked at how can we then realise the density. So we've provided a low, medium and high target. This is aligned with the 950 dwellings that we foresee capable of being handled on the Floriat Forum site itself. We then foresee that the remaining 300 dwellings could be accommodated on the frame precinct directly to the east. As part of that DRP process, there was many iterations of how we could manage the graduation of building height from the lower height frame through to key landmark locations on the corners of the precinct. Sites A, B and F are the least incumbent at present and likely to be the first cabs off the rank of sorts, and really go a long way to kick-starting that urban infill on the Forum site. Part of this plan also foresaw a reconfigured mall, facilitating additional basement car parking and just a significant upgrade of the centre to bring it in line with current retail design methodologies. We had Taylor Robertson, Channy Broderick providing inputs on retail design and comparison projects in that capacity. As part of that feasibility testing, again, looking at the low, medium, high, and then we've expanded that more recently to then compare it to recent case study projects, being the Ocean Village in City Beach, West Village in Karrinyup and the Grove in Claremont, and just try and get an understanding of the demographic that are likely to move into these, move into these apartments and the spatial quality that they're seeking. So generally, the apartments are on the larger size, and then we've just provided a comparison of those based on the current dwelling yields we've been seeking that can align with the DRP direction from Cambridge, and identify that, I guess, any reduction in height would impact the ability for the precinct to hit the LPS targets. Part of that is just the detailed analysis that we've been through, looking at car parking ratios, apartment areas, the ability for light, ventilation, northern solar aspect, deep soil, all the critical elements from volume 2 of the R codes, just to ensure the robustness of that investigation. And then very quickly, we've been also involved in understanding the buffer zones between the frame, the centre. We've been looking at overshadowing on the right-hand side, ensuring that midwinter shadows don't cross Oceanic Drive and only have minor impacts along Floriat Avenue, all critical elements within the PSP development design. And then we've got some key points there, but I might hand over to Dion.
Good timing, Chris. Thank you. Is that second one coming? Yeah, thanks very much, Chris. And commissioners, just briefly touching on, I think we've been here before, but obviously there's been a very long and deliberate process around the infill targets and where that would be met in Cambridge, which has culminated in a local planning strategy, and particularly a significant number of dwellings on the Florian Forum site to cater for Florian City Beach. The process has been extensive, not only getting to the proposal being formally lodged, but the process to get to advertising, and we're all well aware of that time frame, which is now approaching 5 years. In terms of the community engagement, April and ourselves, the wider team, have been very proactive, both pre-advertising and during advertising, to reach out to all stakeholders in the community, particularly the tenants, the wider community and the frame landowners, and a series of initiatives there leading up to the lodgement of the plan that work through those issues thoroughly to not only understand where the sensitivities were in terms of redevelopment, but also the things that people do value in the current centre. And then I think, as was asked during the Commission assessment of the advertising request, we were proactive during the lead up to and during the advertising period to make sure that we were making initiatives over and above to make people aware of the PSP advertising process. Design review, Chris has touched on. Suffice to say, that was an exhaustive process led by the town's own DRP, some really critical fundamental understandings of the practical issues around the overall retail tenancies and leases, but also the upside opportunity in terms of retail upgrades, provision of the East-West link, as Chris has touched on, the overall building heights and transitions, which were very strongly directed by the panel, and some of the secondary issues, including how tree interface. The assessment over the last 6 odd months has been really thorough. We've had 2 extensions of time, which we were very happy to agree to try and bring the plans together. 5 clarification sessions, including 2 with the team, detailed briefings from both Graham Taylor and the MJA team, just to really understand the practical issues and approach around retail upgrade and delivery of residential dwellings. Very detailed clarification and provision of the actual leases for both Woolworths and Coles. Importantly, Coles obviously has copped a lot of attention due to the East-West link, and it's important to say from our point of view, it's not simply just a line on a box. There is a 10-year lease in place through to 32, 30, the numbers are wrong, 34, 33, with a 5-year option that takes it to 38. The important thing is there that Coles have just been through a $12 million plus refurbishment. So further to the lease, they've expressed they have no interest in moving, and they certainly don't have an interest in being outside of the mall. The feedback from the community is very clear that one of the key things they value about Floreat is the availability and proximity of the 2 supermarkets, and it's a really important part of the centre's attraction. But more than that, the 2 main leaseholders are absolutely fundamental to the feasibility of redevelopment. The ability to work with those 2 key tenants to allow continuous trade to work through progressive upgrades is absolutely critical and goes much further than just a lease commitment. East-West Link's obviously connected to that. A lot of clarification around key feasibility drivers, rental income staging, continuous trade obligations, redevelopment costs that are absolutely fundamental to where we've ended up, not as a compromise, but as a really considered, practical and deliverable plan for the retail upgrade of the centre and the delivery of residential dwellings in line with the LPS. And importantly, really, perhaps unfortunately for April, it's not the end of the journey. This is really just the beginning, and now the real homework begins in terms of detailed reassessment of the feasibility, staging, tenant engagement, and getting through to those initial DAs will actually allow building development to occur. I think really the only difference, aside from the misunderstanding about retail upgrades, is that of building heights. And I think, as Chris has articulated, it's been a very thorough process in terms of gradation of heights, specific direction from the DRP to put heights on the western side at the northern and southern end of the centre, and a really considered separation from existing surrounding single residential areas, significant separation. I won't touch on the school, because I think at the end of the day, both proposals include significant residential apartments on the western side and do face that school. More critically, it comes back to the fundamental strategic planning imperative, aside from improving the centres, to deliver on those targets. As Chris has pointed out, the market testing in what is a largely single residential area with homes at 200, 300, 400 square metres is the downsizer market, does expect resi generous apartments. We've pitched at the lower end of that based on market evidence of 116, which is not huge. Even that number only gets us to 970 total, and that's assuming that the library's developed, which is now highly unlikely, and 300 dwellings in the frame, which I think you all understand and agree is going to be a long, hard ask within the 10-year time frame. So the key issues: substantial centre upgrades, practical delivery of LPS targets, tower footprints that occupy less than 10% of the site when you look at the towers that are above 8 stories, which is the key difference between the two plans. Significant separation. We don't have any direct frontage to the primary school. We are adjacent, granted, but we don't have any development. Towns plan as development along the entire western boundary. We have the retention of major supermarkets, which is critical. That's related to the continuous ability to trade. And the April engagement, major tenant engagement, has been extensive. We've been through a thorough process of review. So in terms of recommendation, we fully support and appreciate the effort that's been put in to reconcile two very complicated and competing plans, but we do believe we have a simple and practical and high quality redevelopment opportunity can deliver on the strategic targets. Our only request is that, particularly with the Building A in the northeast corner, which is one of the least constrained sites in the entire centre, that be retained at the 12-storey maximum that was in the initial proposal, as that is quite likely to be able to deliver very early in the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Dion. Appreciate the deputation. I'm sure there will be questions. Members? Member Harmon?
Supermarket tenure. So Coles is at least 2033, is that right? Yeah. 5-year option. My understanding with an option is that that's entirely in the tenant's benefit and they control that. Yeah. So for one better term, it's really until 2038, realistically. Yeah. Woolworths is also in the centre. Do you know what their tenure is? Because speaking to the idea of either PSP and mainly the towns being implementable, for want of a better term, it would also rely on the Woolworths being moved, redeveloped, demolished, whatever. Do you know what their tenure is?
They're through to a similar period with options, but I can't say a lot, but they are advanced in terms of trying to extend that arrangement. Sure. And fundamental to the redevelopment. Yeah. I might also just point out with the leases, it's not just the actual tenancies themselves, it's the lighting areas, it's connections and servicing too. So it's an extremely complex issue in terms of, I guess, the influence and importance of them as a major stakeholder in the redevelopment.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your deputation. Quite clearly, the issue of height has been significant focus, and so I do need to touch on that. And there is obviously proposed changes as part of the recommendation, particularly on the northwestern tower element. If you want to perhaps speak to that in terms of its potential implications.
Yeah, look, I think the key for us, and with the benefit of going through the more detailed exercise over the last couple of months in particular, as the modifications have come forward, is to go back to the yield work and look at in more detail what's happening in market and where average sizes are landing. I think as Chris has articulated, with the sizes we're seeing, which we are making a modest assumption on, we're at the lower end, arguably below the threshold that we need to deliver. So any reduction in height at any point of the site to us is very sensitive and fundamental to hitting the dwelling targets, but it's also part of the feasibility piece. The highest value real estate is logically in the upper ends of buildings. And I think as we surrounding single residential areas. There's no overshadowing impact. It's largely self-shadowing, and really to us any reduction in height is really arbitrary and unnecessary when we look at where Cambridge is at their infill targets as we speak, and more broadly within the wider city. That finding reasons to reduce height in those sort of circumstances seems a bit counterintuitive to the strategic imperatives of the planning strategy. But
through the chair, if I may, point taken, noting however obviously the planning strategy did also have some indicative heights associated with it, so trying to balance that. Can I ask though that the items that were raised, particularly around the school interface and the access and traffic components, has that been looked at in detail? And I would be particularly interested in any commentary around the issue of the overshadowing of the actual classroom component and potential sensitivities that may be attributed to that.
Yeah. So look, in terms of TAA, I guess both proposals are fundamentally almost the same, except for the internal road. At the end of the day, they've both got an existing network with surrounding traffic flows. There's a level of residential development and floor space that both parties would say is similar. The only difference is the low-speed one-way road that comes through the centre from the east to the west near the school. From our point of view, that actually just enhances circulation around the centre and actually reduces the concentration on the external roads. The fact that it is low speed through the centre itself, but also tames the top end of Hartree where vehicles are coming off the northern intersection back through the school. So we'd see it actually as the opposite effect. It's a calming situation where you've got low speed vehicles exiting out at that point. I'm not fully across the intersection design detail, but I guess the key is that at DA stage, there'd be more updates to traffic impact assessments and particularly detailed treatments, turning arrangements and those sorts of issues would be thoroughly worked through at that point in time. You asked also about the separation sensitivity of school. Look, it's a complex and sensitive area. Obviously, having residential opposite schools, again, I'll come back to the fact that we've got residential facing the reserve on the north side of the school. We don't have any direct interface to the school itself. The town's proposal, as I understand it, has buildings down the entire western frontage, including directly opposite the school. The heights, I recall, being around 6 to 8. I'm not sure exactly what. I'm not sure exactly where the library is in the overshadowing, but I would say we're to the northeast of that, of the school more broadly, and I would imagine the overshadowing impacts are fairly limited to a probably narrow window on a winter's morning, but it's not a catastrophic overshadowing impact on the school or any of the specific parts of it.
Thank you, through the chair. If I could also then ask the issue that was raised around sustainability and water management and how you would intend to address that.
Yeah, so certainly in terms of the work that aspect did, there was really detailed assessment of the existing trees and I guess a commitment to general water sensitive urban design techniques. We haven't gone deep on specifically what that is in terms of water sensitive urban design and sustainability measures, largely because we see that that is something that will evolve in much more detail at the DA stage, but at a commitment level, best practice around water sensitive urban design and sustainability is a core part of what would come forward at that stage of the process.
Thank you. And finally, if I may, on the transport side, again, noting that obviously we're not dealing with the location that is station precinct, that has there been discussion today on the PTA around public transport and how that might be enhanced as part of any future development?
Testing my memory here, but look, there were definitely some high-level discussions at the time around particularly the opportunity. I believe it's a high-frequency route that comes out of Shenton Park and heads north up Selby, and that ideally once there's additional dwellings on the ground that potentially that route could be rerouted to improve station access onto the Fremantle line. And then obviously there's a feeder bus routes that work north and south and then up the eastern flank of the site. So there is, of course, it's only a bus service. There's a reasonably high level of service to 3 of the sides of the centre. So I guess once redevelopment starts to occur and there's a critical mass, talking to PTA about the potential to perhaps redirect or increase some of those services. But I think the position generally at PTA, you need to get to that point before you can make the case for those realignments or reroutings to occur.
Thank you.
Members, questions? Thank you. Go ahead.
Through the chair. Commissioner Heron took most of my questions actually, but I've still got a couple. There was a couple of questions a lot around that the centre, your plan is a lot more car focused, not good for pedestrians. The east-west link is not good, it's a bit more convoluted. And I just wonder if you could expand on that and respond to those queries.
I guess that was the primary focus from us as residential architects, is how do we provide that front door to residential development. Having a pedestrian focus, but also having that shared space so that you can bump in, bump out. We have 24-hour access across the site. We found that where you have those sorts of situations, it's a lot safer for new residents, you know, in a shopping centre scenario. And just having the ability to be able to come in, quickly drop off, it sort of adds to the retail experience as well. And where we find it's just limited to pedestrians, you don't get that vibrancy, which is something that we're really trying to get over, you know, that 24-hour period.
I think too, just in terms of if there needs to be a comparison, at the end of the day, it is a district centre with major supermarkets. It is a drive to retail destination. The ultimate, I guess, solution to increasing walkability and pedestrian activity is maximising the residential above, where people don't need to get in their car to go to shopping or recreational things that exist to an immediate west of us. So I don't really see any difference at all in the two plans from that point of view.
And if I may, Chair, so in staging, I mean, part of the consideration we all have to look at is getting a plan that's implementable and can be delivered, and maintaining the amenity is very important in that. I mean, it's a very busy shopping centre with a lot of amenity, a lot of, not just Coles Woolies, but a lot of other things. You implied that, or mentioned on that building A might be the first stage. Maybe actually my question is, where do you think the staging would be and how you could do it, and that whether that is in fact able to be done by keeping the facility open?
Yeah, good question. I mean, we had a very detailed review of staging on the way through, particularly with Graham's expertise and sitting with the April team, just understanding how that will work from a retail trade point of view. The simple answer is we need to go back and revisit all that stuff again, but the absolute commitment is to try and get residential development and centre improvements happening sooner rather than later. In terms of the retail enhancements, obviously the key is the supermarket operators. They have a lot of protection within their lease around continuity of trade and protection of the trade experience, so that's really a really important focus for us to go back and sit with them and work out how that can be staged and evolved. Certainly there was substantial redevelopment of the eastern side of the existing centre away from the boxes of ours, a reconfiguration of the malls, an introduction of additional floor space including mini majors. So there's a whole really detailed and complex piece of work in terms of feasibility staging and tenant negotiation and engagement to work through on that front. But sorry, the northeast is really key and important. We could potentially start that quite soon, or going well. I think as Chris touched on, it's then probably followed by the southern side is one of the simpler sides. Libraries obviously out of the question. North gets a bit complicated. East would take some time to work through.
Thank you. Commissioner Brooks was next, and I'll go to Member Knight.
Just, I guess, a bit of a clarification. I think when you talked about the sort of pedestrian movement through the site, you were more talking about the residents and their access and their experience of the site. I guess some of the things that have been raised in people's submissions today has been around the experience of pedestrians accessing the school and passing through the site and around the site. Can you give a little bit of, I guess, an indication of how that's been considered through your plan as well, please?
Do that as well, but yeah, we really do see that the community have good access from the frame through and across to the school.
Sorry, through the chair. It was a really critical part of our negotiations and working through with the DRP was that east-west connection, understanding how residents on the eastern side of the forum navigate through the precinct to the western side. We put a lot of time and energy into that internal street. It's of note that it would be a private street on the centre side, so the ability to close that street down for events was also a really important factor in the design. Community markets, open days, it's a really interesting opportunity. We completed a lot of solar studies on that as well to ensure there was good or excellent solar access to that space, and also alluded there earlier in my commentary that through that DRP process we did simplify the way that the internal street worked. So we took away the roundabout. There was really strong opposition from DRP regarding that first roundabout and the ability for pedestrians to navigate that safely. That then facilitated the inclusion of additional islands through Howtree Place as refuges partway across, in addition with crosswalking. And then it was the simplification from two-way down to a single way for vehicles. So really slow-moving traffic, the key urban design moved to improve and continue the movement of people through the space at a slower speed in a defined pedestrian realm. So we see it as a really important element and really facilitating that neighbourhood connectivity.
I think, sorry, to that extent, just a really important alternate to just a purely pedestrian-focused linkage, because it does enable extensive external trading tenancies, which were seen to be a focus for hospitality, and having people moving through, including vehicles at slow speed after hours, a really important part of the hospitality function of the centre that is already at that northern end. And I think, as Wes has pointed out, the pedestrian or the visitation and drop-off and access to the residential apartments and enjoying that space is really key.
Thank you. Probably quite a similar question to Commissioner Brooks. The submissions did raise with the public open spaces, and I wondered if you had anything more that you'd like to add.
And perhaps you could comment on the fact that there are a number of modifications around that in relation to access and open space, and whether you're accepting those modifications.
Look, I think we're reasonably comfortable. We went through a pretty detailed process, I guess, in terms of the arrangement of public space, particularly the northern plaza, but also the southern plaza, cross-access through the site, and then the deep soil zones that Chris has touched on. So I must admit there's been a lot of modifications and a lot of lengthy agenda items circulating. I think at this point we're generally comfortable with the modifications that are being put. We would prefer the heights get rounded up to the maximum available because of the yield-related issues. The rest we're comfortable with and resolve at the DA stage.
Member Knight, did you have anything further on that? Okay. Look, I know that you've touched on the school, but given that we have had quite a few deputations that have really focused in on that and been quite specific about concerns of overshadowing, particularly the outdoor learning area in the library, and we have had the principal come in and talk about this today, we'd just like to give you the opportunity to delve a little bit more deeply into any issues you've heard today about impacts on the school and what your view is in relation to the extent of those impacts.
Yeah, look, I think we heard a couple of legitimate issues in terms of particularly the safety and pedestrian safety and access around the centre, and certainly our view is that the outcomes, particularly with the one-way street, which is the key difference, will actually enhance safety around the school. In terms of the overshadowing, I think primarily we've got a building that doesn't have a direct abuttal to the school. It does sit to the northeast. It is, granted, it's taller, but the alternate includes residential development all the way down the western boundary of the Florey Forum, and it includes the boundary that directly abuts the eastern side of the school. I'm not 100% familiar where the outdoor learning area is or the library, so it's a bit hard to comment on that other than to say there is some separation. It's at a different point of the compass, which I think would have reasonably limited impact from that point of view. But in terms of number of apartments opposite the school, I would say it's equal in my view.
Thank you. And also just in relation to civic uses, you know, we've heard about that today as well, and of course the town owns the library and Boulevard Centre site over which your plan does have development. Can you talk about how you foresee that happening, what sort of engagement you would propose having around that, given that that is that sort of 5% area of the core that does sit with the town?
Yeah, happy to touch on it. I mean, certainly there was some discussions early on where the town was very open to actually including their land, and there was discussions around potential sale of that site. As the process went on, that didn't progress, but the broader planning assumed that it could be integrated in. Now, obviously, it's probably not likely to be, given where we've ended up. We'll continue to try and see if we can work together with the town to reconcile that. And that goes for not just the physical integration, but I guess also the use and programming that is on that site currently and what might be possible into the future. Certainly the early discussions about if there were to be an acquisition of that site, which we understand there's some commercial challenges for the town in terms of maintaining, particularly the facilities downstairs, that we would look to integrate a library or other smaller scale facility that was more suitable to current needs within the actual redevelopment.
Thank you. Member Franklin?
I just wanted to clarify the east-west link and the 10-year kind of arrangements. There was obviously discussion of closure possibly for certain events. I'm just wanting to know whose discretion will that closure be in the longer term, and how will that operate?
Yeah, I think the ones we've done in the past, it basically operates as an easement in gross, and there needs to be a management order that sits over that, and we will work with the town to understand how, I guess, public accessibility is managed so that perpetual public access is achievable through the site, but if there are to be closures or other things temporarily for events, that's something that has to go through a process with the town.
Thank you very much.
Members, anything further? Yes, go ahead, Commissioner Herron.
Thank you, through the chair. And I think the key question that does need to be asked is what happens if the GHD plan is approved from the proponent perspective?
I think the simple answer to that is nothing. And I think that's the guts of the issue that, unfortunately, as you've heard today, there's been a view that to engage with us is a conflict of interest. There seems to be a limited understanding of commercial realities of the existing leases and retail redevelopment and improvement, and the residential development yields that go with that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just another thing that has come up, perhaps not as strongly today, but during submissions and in consultation, is the condition of the shopping centre. Obviously, you've talked about the Coles investment, but beyond that, given that it will continue to be part of your plan going forward, what are your plans in relation to updating and renovating the existing centre?
Yeah, look, I think again, today is really the start of the journey for us to get back and focus on exactly that. That it's unfortunate that when these processes go on, that investment decisions do get delayed because there's no certainty around what the long-term opportunity is. Now that hopefully today we can have some resolution to that one way or another, well then we can turn our minds to refurbishing what's there or actually doing something far more exciting and really reinvigorating the retail component and adding that residential housing.
Thank you. Members, are there any further questions? No, thank you very much for your deputation today.
Thank you.
Members, that concludes our verbal deputations for the day, and noting that we have received the 9 written submissions which are included in the agenda and have been provided to members in advance of the meeting. So we will now turn to dealing with the item before us, the single item left for today, which is item 3.2, the precinct structure plan for Floreat precinct structure plans determination. We are joined by Dale Sanderson, Ben Hesketh and Carly Pidco from the department, and I understand that you do wish to talk us through a few key matters before we take questions. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. Over to you, please. It'd be good to hear from you in relation to things that have come up through the deputations today that you would like to address, and any other key matters that you wish to draw to our attention. Thank you.
I'll cover some background, including some matters that have come up in deputations that didn't come through in the written submissions, and then Carly will talk to some more detail of the department's assessment. So the committee previously considered APL PSP in July 24 when it determined the Commission should advertise APL PSP on behalf of the town in order to be made available for public comment. Soon after, in September, the town resolved to advertise its town-led PSP. There was a substantial response to both PSPs. Importantly, we've assessed both PSPs in parallel. They came to us at the same time, so that was convenient in being able to look at both parallel and determine what the best outcome was for the precinct. Importantly, this has included review of submissions, meetings with the town, the community working group, and a number of landowners within the PSP area, both the shopping centre owners as well as owners in the frame. Also undertaking assessment against the town's LSP and obviously the Commission's strategies and policies. Our assessments landed us in a position that is close to the APL PSP and the town's PSP. Key reasons are the town's PSP requires wholesale redevelopment of the existing shopping centre appears to be unlikely. There's a lot of discussion about leases, but beyond leases, recent developments at other centres in Perth demonstrate it's not common for wholesale redevelopment of centres. Centre owners, for whatever reason, tend to build on what is there. As a subset of this, the east-west connection in the APL PSP can more practically be implemented in the towns, which cuts through the existing supermarket tenancy, but also split the shopping centre in two. I think it's also noteworthy that the proposed connection in the APL PSP is a significant improvement on the connection through the site at the moment, which involves level change, areas with low surveillance, and it's not a legible connection. The lower building heights in the town's PSP require complete redevelopment of the shopping centre itself to meet the dwelling targets. So, I mean, even if that is realistic, it's probably less likely in the short to medium term. And the town's plan proposes restrictive development controls like 9-metre front setbacks over the residential frame that, in our view, are not appropriate in an activity centre. Some deputations have promoted a further deferral of the PSP for a couple of reasons. In relation to the idea that there should be further dialogue, the process under the planning and development regulations provides for preparation, advertising and assessment of the PSP, facilitates that dialogue. The town's policy that's been discussed today, develop a contact with staff, we know limits such dialogue. Regardless, our assessments included a process of consultation and dialogue, as I've just outlined, and that's contributed to the recommendation we've made. We've also had a couple of deferrals on this item already. The items have been under assessment for effectively a year. And further dialogue would require agreement from both parties. The deferral ends this week, and so without further agreement from both parties, there will be an appeal right that kicks in. So in my view, it would be best for SPC to make the decision today. There was also a request for an alternate recommendation relating to the town's PSP and some commentary regarding procedural fairness. We, importantly, as I've said, have been through a process of not only assessing APL's PSP, we've assessed the town, we haven't just looked to make modification to APL's PSP. The town were provided the opportunity to provide comment on the modifications, 2 rounds of modifications that we recommended to APL's PSP. And I think more relevantly, if we were to go through the process of drafting a suite of modifications to the town's PSP, we end up back in the same spot. As I say, we've looked at the site and the information and said, this is what we think can be achieved. Here's a suite of modifications that take us to that point. So if we were to look at the town's PSP and draft a suite of modifications, we'd end up at the same point, just with a different set of words. I'll pass to you, Carly, to talk to the specifics.
So I'll talk to the assessment process and give a bit more context on that. I think the really important thing to emphasise here is that the department officers have conducted an independent assessment of both PSPs as they've come in, and it's over that essentially 12-month negotiation process that we've gotten more into the space of comparison. In terms of our assessment and how we treat each one, we really look at, I guess, 2 categories of assessment. Firstly, and as many deputations have pointed out today, we do look at how each plan aligns with the state planning framework in terms of its general consistency with the principles and the aspirations of the framework. And we did come to the conclusion that conceptually, both plans can achieve those core concepts. That's delivering the activities and functions of a district centre, delivering the dwelling yields that are envisioned by the local planning strategy and sub-regional frameworks, and albeit in very different ways, they can both deliver that concept of an attractive, mixed-use, vibrant range of retail type aspirations that are provided for the Florida District Centre in the town's local planning strategy. Where we really see a key point of difference in the assessment is how both plans are able to overcome the constraints of this site, those unique constraints that always impact how we can deliver planning outcomes and how they are put together, and how that then impacts the feasibility. And it's important to stress here that feasibility is not simply about the developer's commercial feasibility, it's about the ability of the plan to achieve its aspirations and for it to be delivered in a cohesive and comprehensive way. So some of the key aspects that drove the bulk of our time spent on this assessment, in particular, I think the one that comes up a lot is the urban structure that results from whether or not to retain the shopping centre footprint. That underlying question is one of the key drivers for the differences in height in each plan, where the height has to be concentrated around the centre or across the site, and where the east-west connection that has been such a popular concept is ultimately located and how it is designed. The decision or our assessment favours the retention of the shopping centre footprint because of the outcomes that it delivers practically. We need to think that the footprint is not, or the impacts of the footprint is not simply about the Coles lease. It is a critical factor for the east-west connection placement, but the whole structure is impacted by whether or not we retain that centre. There was a comment made to Woolworths. There are other tenants, there are small businesses that would also need to be relocated should there be a whole-scale redevelopment. So we need to look at whether the continuity of the centre is feasible with those two different approaches. Alongside that is the resultant blocks, if you like, development blocks that come out from the two different structures and road placements. In the April plan, we have some smaller blocks with more concentrated tower height, and then we have a level of detail that the proponent has provided that shows how they can deliver apartments that achieve really key detailed design aspects that we don't always see upfront in a precinct plan, such as the solar access, ventilation, circulation internal to the buildings. So that level of detail has been demonstrated and why, or how that impacts heights, footprints. With the more square blocks that we see from the town-led plan structure, we would anticipate that we have more challenges with accommodating uses or, I guess, adjacent facilities for the centre, such as parking, access points, loading areas, simply because we now have more discrete blocks that will all expect their own discrete services. So there's flow-on effects there. In terms of the height, one thing that I will also point out with our assessment is there are various, I think, opinions on whether the planning framework sets height limits or not in this centre. Our view is that the local planning strategy provides an indication that the character of the residential frame should be approximately 5 stories, with an implication that the residential core could have additional height, but that is not fleshed out in great detail within the local planning strategy document itself. The officer's report from the town of Cambridge has leaned on the state planning policy 4.2 for activity centres and the residential design codes to, I guess, determine what an appropriate height level might be. And it's important to point out here that with the R codes heights that the town's assessment relies on, they are based upon indicative typologies. They are not height limits in a strict sense. They are default typologies for various RAC or residential activity centre zonings that are available should that be an appropriate planning response. In a district centre and in a precinct structure plan setting, however, we favour from a planning perspective, we favour the able approach of an RAC 0, where we allow the precinct plan to speak to the appropriate built form, height, and all those other planning constraints. Because the idea, I guess, of a precinct structure plan is to deliver a unique solution and a unique character for the site that is being addressed. So the default residential design codes typology may be useful as a starting guideline, but we would not consider them a prescriptive constraint for this site. I think one of the other important things to focus on here, which has driven a lot of our discussions in the assessment, is the transition across the site. We have two sort of distinct sub-precincts, a residential core and then a residential frame that hasn't been discussed quite as much today. And part of that transition space is how Floria Avenue is treated by both PSPs. The APL plan, in very crude terms, the APL plan puts forward a vision for Floria Avenue that is more in line with the centre streetscape character. So Floria Avenue is sort of meeting the centre core, whilst we then have a residential frame that sits adjacent. I think the town's vision for Floria Avenue is more of the garden suburb character, so it's meeting the adjacent residential. From a generally what we would consider a strong design approach to transition, we would favour the more urban approach, and on that I would note that our state planning policies for precinct design do speak to focusing on the intended character of the precinct. So the intended character being the district centre, rather than over-reliance on trying to hold on to or trying to replicate a garden suburb character in the adjacent space. I think the last concept I'll bring up here is in relation to the movement network, given there has been many concerns regarding traffic. We have conducted an independent assessment of both the TIAs that were provided by each proponent, and that includes input from our own internal traffic engineering services. The responses that both provide are at a very high level quite similar, other than we have one pedestrianised east-west link and one-way low-speed east-west link. Where we saw the most significant difference between these two plans is in the estimates for vehicles per day, which of course then drives solutions, notwithstanding that the solutions in themselves were quite similar. And you can see that in the modifications we have recommended that further work is done to address that discrepancy. And part of addressing that discrepancy would be about massaging the proposed solutions if it turns out that that's needed. Modifications in general, we have recommended quite a number of different modifications here, and I think there's really two key issues to flag for you. In relation to building heights, we have recommended that the building heights be reduced to essentially 8 stories along that Floria Avenue frontage. That is part of trying to create the effective transition zone between the two sub-precincts. And it's also about acknowledging that the height sensitivities that came through in the community consultation primarily impact the residential area lying to the east. So we were looking to reduce the height there to get the streetscape character against the residential area that might be more in keeping with a transitional space and community expectations. The other major modifications, and this is the bulk of the table that is presented in the report, relate to implementation. So we have received feedback through community consultation, through discussions, through our own independent assessment of what should happen, that there needs to be, I guess, an enhancement to the interface, to the public realm, and to the presentation of some of these buildings to the streets. Where it is appropriate for the development to contribute to those outcomes, we have included staging, or we have recommended, I should say, changes to the staging and implementation components of the APL PSP, so that each development parcel is tied to an incremental improvement on the building facades and the general presentation and contribution to the character of the area.
Thank you very much, Carly. Members, I'll now hand over to you for questions. Yes, go ahead, Commissioner Layton.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you for that presentation. The plan with the heights up, whilst we're doing that, I'm just trying to get an understanding of where the measurement of the building height is from, because I know on the building height on the east of the retail area, that's lower than the residential, probably a couple of stories below. So the effective height from to the adjacent residential is, you're recommending 8 stories, is probably 6 or less, I thought, or because it drops down. Am I reading that right? So when you made that assessment of the building height, have you made the assessment from the lower level or the impact, or from the higher level?
Yes, from the
road
ground level. Yes.
Okay. So the effective height on that high level will only be about 5 or 6 stories, is that?
We would expect about a 1 level difference.
1 level difference. Okay. And a follow-up question on that, specifically to that northeast corner and the discussion that the proponent had about the need to try and hit these minimum yields of 900 or so units, and that by reducing some of these heights, and particularly in that northeast corner, that they're still requesting it to be 12 stories instead of the 8. I wonder if you just comment specifically on that building about that, whether that they're asking for 12 and you pulled it back to 8, and the rationale and
So the 8 stories there has been largely driven by the intended Florida Avenue streetscape and transition outcomes. In terms of the yield, I think the 4 stories on a reasonably small tower site is not a significant number of dwellings in terms of the overall precinct, and there may be opportunities through the mix of apartments and apartment sizes to absorb across the precinct.
Thank you. That's all.
Members? Yes, Member Franklin.
I note that you have a modification in regard to transport impact assessment, and also in your presentation today, you're looking at sort of, I think the word was massaging the development application going forward, perhaps to address certain issues. In today's deputations, active transport planning has been raised, and the issue of movement through the centre and its relationship to land users around. Is there an ability in that modification to address those kind of issues of active transport management? Or does it need to be expanded upon?
We would consider that the TIA has provided some guidance consistent with what we would expect in this setting, bearing in mind we have a reasonably constrained site. We do have an established path network which could be improved probably more in terms of its amenity than in terms of expanding the actual network itself. So those sorts of improvements we would expect to happen, I guess, incrementally and through negotiation as development unfolds. In particular, public transport, I think as has been flagged earlier, there is proactive planning and opportunities to advocate with PTA to improve the service there. But I think from a public transport perspective, we would not be anticipating a need for infrastructure that has to be resolved at a PSP stage, such as train station sites and whatnot.
Thank you. Members, go ahead, Mr. Herring.
No, nothing to go first. If I could just ask in relation to, again, the issue of transport has been covered off, and I did touch on this issue around PTA and engagement. Has the department undertaken any engagement with PTA in terms of public transport and its integration in either plan?
So we have consulted with PTA in relation to both plans, as is our standard practice when assessing a PSP. The feedback from PTA was generally neutral. They did not identify as significant constraints. There was only one aspect that they particularly objected to, which was a very small question that was raised about a development infrastructure contribution or similar to upgrading public transport. They were not keen on getting into funding arrangements through this mechanism, but outside of that, not any notable objections.
Thank you. And further to that, if I can just clarify, in terms of the design review feedback, so that's obviously been a consideration which was taken on board, that has there, in terms of the design review, in relation to the April plan or the proponent-led plan, there was, as I understand it, broad support from the design review committee, and that included issues in relation to height. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, that reflects the information we've received.
Thank you.
Thank you. I also just want to give you the opportunity to comment. The town has raised today that they feel that that their plan should have been assessed with potential modifications put forward. You've clearly outlined that this has been through an extensive assessment process. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to comment on that.
I think from a practical perspective, we were probably driven in particular by the practicalities of having two plans in place and really needing to favour a plan with the modifications that can deliver the best planning outcome. If we were to go down the path of having two plans with two potential sets of modifications, which I appreciate still means that there is potential for only one to still be adopted, I think we really run the risk that either we end up with two plans that will ultimately achieve the same thing, where one is modified to be more like this and this one is modified to be more like this. Because the reason for modifications is essentially to address those underlying planning concerns or deficiencies that contribute to the outcomes of the plan. So the modifications should be seeking to address a competent outcome regardless of which plan they are for.
Thank you, Carly. Members, are there any further questions? Okay, then we'll move to consideration of the items. So we're dealing now with the precinct structure plans for Floreat Forum District Centre. If I could please call on a mover and a seconder to move the item as recommended, or if there is an alternate. No, that's moved by Commissioner Heron and seconded by Member Harman. I'm assuming you're removing the report's recommendation. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, and I can assure that both that there has been careful consideration and deliberation in the report, that there has been significant questions posed in terms of ensuring that there is, again, the procedural fairness that may have been referred to. Ultimately, as I indicated previously, that the notion as to a plan is important, that the linkage to implementation is critical, and it is around that implementation that I ultimately fall to the side of the recommendation that has been presented. Although I note that there has been a request for the return of some additional height, I do feel that the balanced assessment that has been presented best reflects a consideration of all the matters at play. I also consider that the notion of, although I can appreciate and the intentions of the town, it does need to be accepted that we do need to, one, take a single plan, and the notion to undertake a detailed planning assessment or undertaking a detailed plan without significant engagement with the core landowner is fundamentally problematic and has ultimately resulted in an outcome that, although on paper may result in certain compliance, is likely to result in nothing occurring, which is why I feel the recommendation that's been presented is the better option. I do think, and I think that we have, it's been flagged here, that the issue around height is a core one. I have given very careful consideration around that allocation, and ultimately height is about where it is placed and how it is treated as opposed to just being the sheer number, and I do think that careful consideration has been given, although I will flag, and it's been noted that there will need to be a DA process to follow, that the issue around particularly that overshadowing component will need to be specifically addressed. I'm not concerned about overlooking, and as I sort of say, the notion, contemporary planning and consideration of public spaces is overlooking is ultimately a positive thing, and that actually contributes to safety as opposed to detracting from it. core issues around traffic and traffic management are clearly, I think, central and need to be addressed. I do think that the additions that have been requested address that in part. I also did take on board the movement through the actual centre itself is critical, and I do think that that is being addressed. The issues around overall traffic and interrelationship with safety at schools is an issue with everything at schools. And I do think that there are processes in place here that will in fact enable that to be managed appropriately. Ultimately, I think the plan that is represented in the recommendation by the proponent-led proposal best reflects, and with the changes that have been proposed, meet an appropriate balance of that strategic objective along with implementation.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Herring. Member Hammond, do you wish to make any comments?
Yeah, sure. I won't go into detail, but I guess a few comments. The town's PSP certainly has a lot of merit, and I think in isolation is fairly well designed. I think where it falls down or lacks is it fails to take into account the fact that we've got an existing shopping centre, and so it fails to take into account that existing context in a meaningful way. It essentially relies on the demolition of a shopping centre that's been long-standing in the community that's probably worth upwards of $100 million, which I think is simply unrealistic to expect, and the proponents made that pretty clear. But the feasibility and the commercial feasibility aside, the shopping centre is an important piece of the community, and especially in a district centre context. So it becomes a really significant piece of the puzzle when designing for a PSP. And therefore there is a lot of merit in designing around it. I guess finally, the town's local planning strategy clearly advocates for density to be concentrated in these types of areas in order to maintain the garden suburb character of the adjoining residential areas. And so I think the proponent-led PSP deals with that in a very balanced and sufficient way. And so we need to accommodate this substantial increase in density, because it is substantial compared to what's there now. But to have any hope of achieving density targets, I think the proponent-led PSP is the one that gets us there. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Further comments from any members?
Yes, we have.
Go ahead, Commissioner Laker.
Thank you, through the chair. Look, I reiterate what the previous two gentlemen have said. I think it is unfortunate we're here today looking at two PSPs, and I hope it doesn't happen again. And I really encourage all councils to engage with proponents right at the start and to be able to come to a solution when it comes to the SPC. I think when I look at the two PSPs, I think the town's PSPs almost looks like, considers it as if it's an empty block of land, which it isn't. It's got constraints on it, and those constraints are real, including maintaining a lot of important amenity for the local community. And there are long-term leases, there are issues around development of that PSP. It's not reasonable to assume that there'll be a wholesale demolition of that and a period of 2 or 3 years before things start moving again. So I don't think it's really implementable in the current climate. I think the April one has been well considered. I think it does enable that staging, and that for me is very important. I think the other factor is in terms of the DRP, significant consideration in terms of design and looking at how the buildings will land and sit, and there's certainly more work to be done on the traffic. I think the east-west connection is very important. I think the solution on the April one is a good nuanced solution. I think the one in the town going right through the guts of the shopping centre and the Coles lease is just not practicable. And I think it'll be a better outcome than what is there at the moment. I've listened to the idea of a deferral. I think it's been deferred twice already. I don't see the benefit of that now in terms of the deferral, and I think we need to move forward. And as such, I'm happy to endorse this recommendation.
Thank you, Commissioner Brooks.
Yeah, so I documentation provided by the two different plans, I didn't see any issues in the supporting documentation tabled by the town that couldn't be resolved and couldn't be resolved through detailed DA considerations. So I think the water management, the environmental aspects can all be addressed through that process. Both plans provide for pedestrian movement through the site and have both proposed different approaches, but I think the APL plan provides a considered approach that gives a balance between movement and activity within the centre itself. Finally, the key is about delivery. Is the plan going to be delivered? And I think that the APL plan gives a clearer, more deliverable approach that is going to least impact to those existing tenants and also the communities that are using that space as it is at the moment.
Thank you. Any further comments? Look, I'll just make a few comments. I think that, as I mentioned at the outset, it is highly unusual for the SPC to deal with two draft PSPs for the same district centre, but I believe that these have been through a thorough assessment. They have been assessed each separately and independently by the DPLH officers, and we've heard further today from Carly about how that has been approached in some detail. The department has made a recommendation to the Statutory Planning Committee based on the assessment of both of those draft precinct structure plans. This is a district centre. It's a district centre under the state planning policy for activity centres and in the local planning scheme. Land ownership is an important issue in planning. The shopping centre is owned, as we know, by a single private landowner, and that forms 95% of the core of the site that we're dealing with. The town obviously retains the library site and the boulevard centre and the local park facing Forest Avenue, and then we have the 36 private lots in the frame. There is an extensive background, and I think this has been touched upon today, but I think that this background has created a fork in the road. We heard from APL that they commenced this process in pre-lodgement from around 2019, that they engaged with the town's DRP from 2021. We've been through an extensive process where the SPC has been involved in order for the APL PSP to be advertised, and that has been undertaken by the department. At that point, I recall saying at the meeting that we strongly encourage the town to engage, that we would like to see the community involved in this plan. It's an opportunity through advertising that the town and local government can then drive that community engagement and seek to influence the plan in a way that serves their community. Rather than that, we have had the town develop a separate plan, and that has been without engaging with APL. I think that is really where the fork in the road has happened here, and I think that it's important that that needs to be mentioned. The town's local planning framework talks to a nodal approach. The strategy promotes retention of their low character garden suburbs, and that's recognised and understood, and it sets in for this district centre a scenario of 900 to 1,250 dwellings, which both are offering to deliver. They both offer a more intense central area, and they both have that connection between Howtree Place and Forest Avenue, which I think is really important. They are both broadly consistent, as we've heard, but I think the key issue that we've talked about today is that implementation is something that the SPC cannot ignore. We do need to be confident that in improving a PSP that has a lifespan of 10 years, that it is actually something that's going to be able to be implemented. We have heard from APL today that should the town's PSP be approved, that they simply won't redevelop. That has to be a critical issue in contemplating that redevelopment can only practically occur if the current or future landowner is willing to do so. We've heard about procedural fairness, we've heard about the role of local government versus the role of the developer, and I would like to say that planning does require a collaborative effort in order to achieve an outcome. A plan without the support of a significant landowner is a plan only. Planning needs to concern itself with both planning and implementation, and local government engagement with community is critical, and the town of Cambridge has done that through their town's PSP, but it also does involve engagement with landowners. That is a critical part in order to achieve implementation. So I'd like to say that the town has had that opportunity to engage, to seek modifications to the first PSP while it was being developed, but opted to develop the second PSP, creating two for us to choose from today rather than one refined PSP. And I think that is important to raise. I'm grateful of the DPLH for going through some detail how this has been assessed. And I understand the request for deferral, but I do not believe that that would result in a different recommendation from the department based upon what they have told us today. And I'm confident in the assessment that has taken part. I do appreciate that this has been something that has involved a lot of community feedback. I only would have liked for that feedback to be a bit more focused on the original PSP to see whether that could have achieved the desired outcome to meet the desire of both the town and APL and the landowners, as well as community. But I think that where we are landing is positive. I've assessed the height, and I think one thing I'd also like to add is that when we are actually looking at height, which are ameliorated through the modifications recommended by the DPLH, that height is not necessarily a bad outcome. I think that in Perth we're going through transition. We're trying to build an understanding of what is medium density, what is high density, that when you do go high, it does allow you to have a bit better ground floor activation and landscaping, etc. And I think that this is not something to be fearful of. I've heard about the primary school today. We've heard about the fact that this is adjacent to rather than directly opposite. I think that any issues can be dealt with through our code assessment of the dwellings and apartments when we come to that, and that there would be a requirement for very well designed, well articulated built form that minimises any impacts on its adjoining neighbours. So I'm confident in the ability for this to be implemented and confident that this will be a quality outcome. I support the recommendation. Are there any further comments? Is there any dissent? The item is carried. Thank you. Members, are there any urgent or other business items to raise? Thank you very much. So I thank you all for your attendance today, particularly to our deputies. Appreciate the effort that it goes into providing your time today, and that you have put a lot of thought into that. And I'd like to close the meeting at 1:29 p.m.